Hey guys. Tonight's we begin with a promise too good to question. You are handed a document, a blessing, a map, maybe a key to salvation itself. The room is warm, the voice is calm, and everyone else already agreed. You hesitate for half a breath, then history nudges you forward. This is the story of clever smiles, official stamps, and the ancient art of separating people from their money without ever raising your voice. You are about to learn how the biggest scams worked precisely because they felt reasonable. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step into a world where trust is not an abstract idea but a tangible thing, heavy as a coin in your palm. It passes from hand to hand without anyone stopping to weigh it too carefully. You notice this immediately because no one here seems especially cautious. They are alert, yes, suspicious, in the way people always are when survival depends on neighbors, weather, and luck. But they also want to believe. Belief oils the gears of daily life. Without it, nothing moves. You are standing in a marketplace that smells like damp wood, wool, and optimism. Merchants smile with the calm confidence of people who have practiced smiling in mirrors made of polished metal. They speak slowly, clearly, as if clarity itself were proof of honesty. No one calls this a scam. The word does not exist yet. There is no need for it. There is only trade. And trade assumes good faith the way breathing assumes air. Money is scarce, but promises are abundant. A man offers you a document stamped with an impressive seal. He explains that it represents land somewhere far away, land you have never seen and likely never will. The seal looks official enough. It is round, dark, and slightly chipped, which somehow makes it feel more authentic. You nod, because everyone else is nodding. Doubt would be rude here, and rudeness is more dangerous than being wrong. In this world, literacy is power, and power wears robes. Most people cannot read, which makes written words feel sacred. Ink is mysterious. Parchment whispers authority simply by existing. If something is written down, it must be true. After all, who would go through the trouble of writing a lie when lies are so easy to say out loud? This logic is deeply flawed, but it is also deeply human, and it will age very well. You learn quickly that trust travels faster than facts. If a man swears his cousin saw a miracle, that miracle has already happened twice by the time the story reaches you. If a priest confirms it, the miracle now has witnesses, footnotes, and a donation box. Skepticism exists, but it is expensive. It costs social standing, safety, and sometimes teeth. It is much cheaper to go along and hope for the best. Scams thrive here because life itself feels like a gamble. Crops fail without warning. Illness arrives uninvited. Kings change their minds. When the ground beneath you is always shifting, a convincing lie can feel like solid stone. Someone offering certainty, even false certainty, is offering relief, and relief is priceless. You notice how often authority is borrowed. A seller mentions a bishop you have heard of. Another references a king you will never meet. Names are currency too, passed around like endorsements. If someone important might approve of this, then surely it is safe. Surely. The lie does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be familiar. There is humor here, dark and unintentional. A man sells protection against dangers no one can see. Another offers maps to places no one can reach. People argue fiercely over the value of objects whose worth exists entirely in agreement. You watch two strangers nearly come to blows over a relic that may or may not be a chicken bone. Both are convinced they are right. Neither considers the possibility that they are both being played. You begin to understand that scams do not rely on stupidity. They rely on structure, on hierarchy, on the simple fact that asking too many questions marks you as difficult. Difficult people do not last long in tight communities. Better to smile, pay, and hope the universe sorts it out later. At night, as candles flicker and deals echo in your thoughts, you realize something unsettling. You would probably fall for most of this, not because you are careless, but because you are tired, because you want things to make sense, because everyone else seems so certain. The best scams feel like participation, not deception. They invite you in, pour you a drink, and let you lie to yourself just enough to make it work. Long before anyone invents a word for being fooled, the machinery is already in place. Trust is the fuel, hope is the engine, and somewhere nearby, someone is counting quietly, very satisfied, as belief changes hands once again. You drift deeper into the medieval market and immediately understand why saints are suddenly very busy. Every stall hums with whispered promises and holy confidence. The air smells like incense, sweat, and wood shavings, which is fitting, because most of what you are about to see used to be wood, will always be wood, and is currently pretending to be divine. Relics gleam from tables like they just finished a long meeting with eternity and decided to sell souvenirs. You stop in front of a man holding a small splinter wrapped in velvet. He tells you it comes from the true cross. Not a cross, the one. He says it gently, like saying it too loudly might cause lightning or competition. You glance around and notice 5 other stalls within shouting distance, selling identical splinters, all from the same cross, all allegedly authenticated, all priced slightly differently depending on how desperate you look. If all these pieces were real, the cross would have been the size of a modest forest. People gather anyway. They always do. A woman presses her palms together and whispers about her sick child. A man with tired eyes asks whether this relic helps with joints, debts, or both. The seller nods enthusiastically, because miracles are very flexible when profits are involved. You realize that no one here is buying wood. They are buying hope, packaged small enough to carry home. Relics are the medieval miracle economy. Saints' bones, saints' teeth, saints' hair, saints' tears if you are lucky, and saints' breath if you are creative. Every fragment promises protection, healing, forgiveness, or at least a feeling that someone important is paying attention. The sellers know this. They do not shout. They murmur. They speak with reverence, because reverence sounds expensive. You watch a priest wander by, frown thoughtfully, and then accept a generous donation to confirm authenticity. His blessing lands softly on the table like a stamp made of prayer. Suddenly the relic weighs more, not physically, but socially. People lean in closer. The price goes up. Authority has entered the chat. Humor bubbles just beneath the surface, though no one laughs. A merchant claims to have a finger belonging to a saint famous for healing blindness. You notice the finger appears suspiciously fresh. Another man offers a vial of holy milk from a saint who lived centuries after dairy preservation was invented. The buyers nod solemnly. Skepticism feels inappropriate here, like questioning a funeral speech. You begin to see how this works. Relics are unprovable by design. No one alive can argue with a saint. No one wants to be the person who says, "I think this is just a stick." Faith does the heavy lifting. Doubt would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability is dangerous in a world already full of plagues, wars, and unpaid taxes. Some relics promise very specific benefits: protection from fire, help with childbirth, guaranteed forgiveness for certain sins, terms and conditions politely ignored. Others are wonderfully vague: general blessings, improved fortune, spiritual alignment. These are the best sellers because they never technically fail. If nothing happens, the miracle simply worked quietly. You watch a man buy a relic and immediately stand straighter, like confidence alone might heal him. For a moment, you almost believe it could. That is the dangerous part. Placebo has always been powerful, especially when wrapped in gold thread and approved by someone wearing robes. Behind the scenes, supply chains hum. Bones are borrowed, purchased, stolen, duplicated. A saint conveniently acquires extra limbs when demand spikes. Entire monasteries quietly specialize in relic production, carving, aging, and packaging holiness with impressive efficiency. No one talks about it openly. Everyone benefits. Pilgrims arrive, donations flow, questions stay polite. Then there are the outright fabrications. The holy spoon that fed a saint soup once, the rock that listened to a prayer, the candle that allegedly cried. These sell surprisingly well. You suspect this is because the line between sacred and absurd is thin, and people would rather lean into wonder than admit confusion. You notice how splinters become stories. Stories become traditions. Traditions become truth. By the time doubt catches up, generations have passed and buildings have been paid for. The relic does not need to be real. It only needs to last longer than scrutiny. As you leave the market, pockets lighter, head full, you understand why fake relics thrive. They do not promise perfection. They promise comfort. In a world that offers very little control, a small piece of claimed holiness feels like insurance. Even if it is just wood, it is wood that listens. You kneel because everyone else is kneeling, and because stone floors have a way of persuading you to comply. The chapel is dim, cool, and heavy with the smell of wax and old promises. Somewhere above you, light filters through stained glass, turning dust into something that feels intentional. This is a place where eternity is discussed casually, like weather, and today eternity is apparently having a sale. A man stands at a table near the altar, not shouting, not pleading, just calmly arranging papers. He is dressed well enough to suggest authority, but not so well that he looks unapproachable. The papers are indulgences. You know this because he tells you, gently, patiently, as if explaining a menu. Each one is written in careful Latin, stamped with official seals, and priced according to the severity of your spiritual situation. Minor sins are affordable. Major ones require deeper pockets and fewer follow-up questions. You watch people approach him the way they approach doctors. Nervous, hopeful, already halfway convinced this will work. Coins clink into a box. Ink dries. Names are recorded. The transaction is quiet and efficient. There is no thunder, no choir of angels, just paperwork. Heaven, it turns out, runs on documentation. The indulgence promises a reduction in time spent suffering after death. Not forgiveness exactly, that would be too generous, but a discount. Think of it as spiritual fast-tracking. You are not escaping consequences. You are merely shortening them, which somehow feels more responsible. You are still accountable, just less inconvenienced. The brilliance of this system is that it cannot be tested. No one comes back to complain. There are no customer reviews. If nothing changes in your life, that is expected. The benefit is deferred, like a very long-term investment with no maturity date. Faith fills the gap where evidence would normally live. You glance at the text as someone hands over payment. The language is precise, legalistic, and impressively vague. It references authority stretching back to saints, apostles, and ultimately someone who definitely cannot be questioned. The seal alone carries more weight than most people here ever will. Ink has power. Ink endures. Ink remembers you when no one else does. The humor of it all sits uncomfortably in your chest. You are watching guilt turned into a commodity, sorted by severity and sold in bulk. There are even whispers of special editions, limited indulgences for festivals, group rates for families. Somewhere, a mind very good at logistics has realized that fear scales beautifully. You notice how no one calls this corruption. They call it mercy. Mercy with structure, mercy with receipts. The church insists this is about compassion, about easing the burden of souls. And maybe, for some people, it is. The feeling of relief after purchasing an indulgence is real. Shoulders drop, breathing slows. If peace arrives, even temporarily. Who are you to argue with the method? Still, something about the process feels transactional in a way prayer never does. You are not asking, you are paying. The difference matters, even if no one wants to say it out loud. Questions are discouraged, not through force, but through tone. Doubt here feels like a failure of manners. You watch a poor man hesitate, counting coins that represent meals. He looks up at the indulgence, then at the box, then back at the indulgence. Eventually, he pays. The relief on his face is immediate. And that is what makes this so effective. The system works because it meets people where they are most vulnerable, then offers a solution that looks official enough to trust. Somewhere behind the scenes, the funds are being tallied. Cathedrals rise. Art is commissioned. Authority expands. All funded by the quiet panic of people who just want to believe they will be okay in the end. You realize that indulgences are not sold with threats. They are sold with reassurance. Hell is implied, but heaven is the product. As you stand to leave, the paper still warm in your memory, you understand why this spreads so quickly. It gives shape to fear. It gives language to anxiety. It turns the unknowable into something you can hold, file, and prove you addressed responsibly. For a moment, kneeling there, it almost feels comforting, and that is the most dangerous part. You follow the document because it looks official, and in this world that is almost the same thing as being true. The parchment is thick, the ink is dark, and the wax seal hangs heavy at the bottom like it knows its job. The seal is the real star here. Red wax, pressed with a symbol you recognize just enough to trust. A lion, a crown, something sharp and important. No one questions seals. Seals do not lie. People do. The decree claims the king has spoken, not in person, of course. Kings rarely inconvenience themselves that way. He has spoken through ink, which somehow makes it feel more permanent. The words announce a new tax, a new border, a new right granted to someone you have never met. The tone is firm but reassuring, like a father explaining why this hurts him too. You nod as it is read aloud, because the man reading it is wearing the right clothes and standing in the right place. You notice how confidence fills in the gaps. No one saw the king sign this. No one watched the wax melt or felt the ring press down. But the man holding it speaks without hesitation, and hesitation is contagious in the wrong way. Certainty, on the other hand, spreads beautifully. You tell yourself that if it were false, someone important would object. Someone always knows better. That someone is never you. Forged decrees work, because authority is a performance. The paper plays its part. The seal plays its part. The messenger clears his throat and plays his part. Even the crowd participates, murmuring approval or frustration on cue. By the time doubt arrives, the play has already closed and the props have moved on to the next town. You watch as land changes hands because of a paragraph. A family is displaced because of a sentence that curls politely at the edges. A merchant gains new privileges because the ink says so. The decree does not shout. It does not argue. It simply exists. And existence here is persuasive. People have learned that fighting paper is exhausting and usually pointless. There is humor in how little effort some forgeries require. A slightly altered seal, a borrowed phrase from a real decree written years ago. A flourish added to a signature no one remembers clearly anyway. Most people cannot read, and those who can are often too busy enjoying their advantage to question it. Literacy does not prevent deception. It just gives it nicer handwriting. You begin to see patterns. The forgeries always arrive during moments of confusion. After a king dies, during a war, when borders feel flexible and everyone is tired, chaos creates demand for clarity. And clarity can be manufactured quickly if you own a pen and believe in yourself deeply enough. You follow one decree across several villages and watch it grow stronger with each retelling. By the third stop, people are referencing it from memory, arguing about its implications, enforcing it with enthusiasm. The original paper is barely needed anymore. The idea has taken root. Authority no longer requires proof. It requires momentum. The people benefiting from the decree insist it is legitimate. They point to the seal. They point to the wording. They point to the inconvenience it causes, because surely no one would invent something so annoying. This logic is surprisingly effective. Suffering feels official. If it hurts this much, it must be real. Eventually, someone whispers that the king never issued this order. The whisper is careful, almost apologetic. It dies quickly. No one wants to unwind what has already been accepted. Undoing authority creates more problems than it solves. It is easier to adjust reality than challenge paper. You realize then that forged decrees are not just about power, they are about speed. Real authority moves slowly. It consults, deliberates, hesitates. Fake authority skips those steps and arrives fully formed, asking only that you keep up. By the time the truth catches up, the forgery has already reshaped the landscape. As the wax cracks and the paper yellows, the effects remain. Land redistributed, taxes collected, lives redirected by a confidence trick that wore a crown on paper. You understand why this works so well. People want order. They want someone else to decide. And if that decision arrives with a seal and steady hands, most will accept it gratefully. You walk away knowing something unsettling. Authority does not need to be real to be effective. You step into a room that smells like smoke, vinegar, and confidence. The alchemist greets you with stained fingers and a smile practiced on mirrors and creditors alike. Shelves sag under the weight of jars filled with powders, liquids, and things that might once have been animals. A furnace glows softly in the corner, because nothing says credibility like controlled fire. You are told to stand back, which of course makes you lean in. He speaks of transformation the way priests speak of salvation. Calm, inevitable, just slightly delayed. Lead into gold, sickness into health, poverty into abundance. All it takes is patience, faith, and a modest financial contribution to cover materials, research, and the mysterious costs of destiny. You nod, because he sounds like someone who has already succeeded and is merely being generous by sharing. The demonstration begins. A dull chunk of metal is placed into a crucible. Powders are added with theatrical precision. He murmurs words that sound ancient enough to be impressive but vague enough to avoid translation. The fire flares. Time passes. Sweat appears. Finally, with a flourish, he produces something yellow and shining. Gold. Actual gold. You feel your pulse quicken, which is exactly the point. He hands it to you. It is warm, heavy enough, convincing in the way stage magic always is when you want it to be real. He explains that the process is delicate, that stability requires additional refinement, that the gold will need care for the first few days. You hear what you want to hear. You imagine debts dissolving, futures rerouted, history quietly adjusting in your favor. Money changes hands. Promises are made. The alchemist smiles with relief disguised as pride. You leave clutching a fortune that feels lighter with every step. By the time you reach home, the gold has dulled slightly. By morning, it flakes. By evening, it is unmistakably something else entirely, something cheap and ordinary and deeply uninterested in your dreams. This is how alchemy works in practice, not as a science, but as theater. The trick is not turning lead into gold. The trick is turning hope into payment before the illusion collapses. Alchemists thrive because they speak to a universal weakness. Everyone wants a shortcut. Everyone wants proof that the universe can be negotiated with, if only you know the right words. Some alchemists believe their own act. These are the most convincing ones. They chase formulas obsessively, filling notebooks with diagrams and theories, always one step away from breakthrough. They sell partial successes, prototypes, early access to enlightenment. When it fails, they blame impurities, planetary alignments, or insufficient belief. Failure is never the process. It is always the conditions. Others know exactly what they are doing. They use clever alloys, surface treatments, sleight of hand learned from traveling performers. They move frequently. A town that has seen your gold crumble is no longer profitable. The road is long, and hope resets quickly when faces change. You notice how authorities tolerate this. Sometimes they even sponsor it. Kings fund alchemists quietly, dreaming of endless wealth without taxes or mines. When nothing comes of it, the experiment is forgotten, the alchemist dismissed, occasionally imprisoned, rarely executed. Everyone pretends this was serious research, because admitting you were fooled by a man with a furnace is bad for morale. There is humor in the repetition. The same promises, the same symbols, the same desperate investors. The philosopher's stone is always almost finished. Immortality is always one adjustment away. Gold is just around the corner, currently evaporating in someone else's hands. You begin to see alchemy less as fraud and more as a mirror. It reflects exactly what people want to believe. That effort can be skipped. That nature can be convinced. That wealth is hiding in plain sight, waiting for the clever or the faithful. The gold does not need to last. The idea does. Long after the fake gold has turned to dust, the story lingers. You almost had it. It nearly worked. If only one variable had been different, this keeps the cycle alive. This is why alchemists never run out of customers. You leave the workshop poorer, wiser, and oddly sympathetic, because for a moment, standing by that fire, watching metal glow, you believed. And belief, like gold, has always been easy to spend and hard to keep. You stand in a hall that echoes slightly too much, which is how you know it was rented for the occasion. Banners hang from the walls bearing symbols no one quite recognizes, but everyone politely pretends to. A man in polished armor adjusts his posture like he is still getting used to the weight of importance. The armor is new, painfully new, shining with the enthusiasm of something that has never seen battle or rain. This is not a knight. This is a purchase. Someone clears their throat and begins reading names. Long names. Names that coil and stretch, packed with titles that sound ancient and impressive. Baron of somewhere, defender of something, lord of a place that definitely exists. If you do not ask questions, each title lands with a satisfying thud, like a stamp hitting parchment. The crowd murmurs approval, because murmuring is cheaper than verifying. You quickly learn that nobility, like gold and holiness, can be manufactured. All it requires is money, witnesses, and the confidence to act offended if challenged. There are men here who owned nothing last year and now insist on being addressed with reverence. Their posture has changed. Their voices have slowed. They have discovered that authority is a costume, and costumes work best when everyone agrees not to laugh. The seller of titles is smooth. He wears robes that suggest education but not labor. He explains lineage in a way that sounds convincing unless you have a chart and several uninterrupted afternoons. Lost bloodlines are rediscovered. Forgotten branches of noble families are conveniently traced to whoever can afford the research. History, it turns out, is flexible if you pay for the right ink. You stand beside a man being knighted who looks deeply relieved. Not proud, not joyful, just relieved. As if this title finally explains why he always felt entitled to more space, more respect, more silence when he spoke. The sword taps his shoulders gently, ceremonially. No vows of service are required. No battlefield awaits. This is knighthood without inconvenience. The humor is subtle but constant. A knight trips slightly over his own cape. Another practices looking stern and settles instead on confused. A newly minted lord mispronounces his own title and quickly corrects himself with a cough. Everyone pretends not to notice. Pretending is the foundation of the entire operation. Fake nobility thrives because hierarchy is comforting. It tells people where they belong and who they should listen to. For those who feel overlooked, a title feels like proof that the world made a mistake earlier and is now correcting it. You are not insecure, the title whispers. You are simply under-acknowledged. No one here asks what responsibilities come with these honors. Responsibility is not part of the package. The appeal is the appearance of permanence. Titles feel solid. They suggest lineage, destiny, a story that began before you and will continue after. For people tired of being ordinary, this is irresistible. You notice how easily others comply. Servants bow a little deeper. Merchants speak a little softer. Even skeptics hesitate, because challenging a title risks social friction, and friction is exhausting. It is easier to accept the fiction and move on. Some of these invented nobles will carry their titles to the grave. They will be carved into tombstones. Their children will inherit them and defend them fiercely. Give it a generation, and the lie becomes tradition. Give it two, and questioning it becomes rude. Authorities know this happens and often tolerate it. Sometimes they benefit. Selling titles raises funds. Invented nobles owe loyalty to the system that created them. Everyone wins, except accuracy, which has never had much political power. You realize that fake knights are not pretending to be brave. They are pretending to be validated. The armor is not for protection. It is for reassurance. It tells the world and themselves that they matter in a way that cannot be argued with easily. As the ceremony ends, applause fills the hall. It sounds genuine. People like stories with clear roles. Lords, knights, commoners. It simplifies things. Complexity fades under pageantry. You step outside into the ordinary street, where titles dissolve quickly in mud and noise. But for those who paid, the illusion holds. They walk taller. They speak slower. They have purchased a version of themselves they always wanted to be. And as you watch them disappear into the crowd, you understand something quietly unsettling. Status is one of the easiest things to sell, because it costs nothing to produce and everything to question. You enter the monastery expecting silence, and you get it. The thick, padded kind that feels intentional. Stone walls keep out the world and also keep in secrets very well. The air smells like beeswax, old books, and something faintly herbal, which you are told is the scent of devotion. Monks glide past in robes worn thin at the elbows, faces calm in the way of people who know something you do not, or at least know how to look like they do. You are here to see the holy objects, not one or two, many, shelves upon shelves of them, cabinets, chests, drawers that require 2 keys and a prayer to open. The monk guiding you smiles gently and assures you that everything here is authentic. He says this with such practiced ease that you briefly wonder if authenticity has a quota. He begins with bones. Saints' bones, carefully labeled, wrapped, and displayed like precious spices. A finger here, a rib there. Several skull fragments arranged with impressive symmetry. You do some quick math and realize that if all of these bones belong to one saint, that saint would have been built like a centipede. You keep this thought to yourself. Silence is encouraged. Next come the objects. A cup a saint once touched, a staff a saint leaned on, a cloth a saint may have glanced at during a particularly spiritual afternoon. Each item has a story attached, and the stories overlap just enough to make questioning them socially inconvenient. The monk explains that miracles tend to happen where faith gathers, and faith gathers where miracles are displayed. This feels circular, but also very tidy. You notice how carefully the objects are arranged. Light hits them just right. Gold accents catch the eye. Glass cases prevent touching, which helps maintain both reverence and resale value. Pilgrims shuffle through with wide eyes and open purses. Donations are suggested, never required, but the suggestion hangs in the air like incense. Holy objects multiply here the way bread does in Scripture, quietly, impressively, and without much explanation. New relics appear after renovations, after donations, after particularly lean years. No one announces their arrival. They simply exist one day, accompanied by a story that has always apparently been there if you had only asked the right person. You learn that monasteries compete, politely. A more impressive relic attracts more pilgrims. More pilgrims bring more money. More money funds more acquisitions. It is a self-sustaining cycle wrapped in prayer. No one calls it commerce. That would feel rude. Some monks genuinely believe. You can tell by the way they speak about the objects, softly, reverently, like they are introducing old friends. Others believe in the system. They speak of logistics, preservation, and outreach. Both types work very well together. Faith handles the front. Administration handles the back. There is humor here too, if you squint. Two monasteries claim the same saint's staff. Both cannot be right, but both are thriving. Pilgrims visit both because hedging your bets feels responsible when eternity is involved. You overhear a monk explaining that saints often owned multiple items, which is technically true if you define item loosely enough. You are shown a room rarely open to the public. This is where duplicates are kept. Not officially duplicates, of course. Variants, alternative fragments, supporting pieces. The monk clears his throat and explains that relics are not diminished by division. Holiness, he says, multiplies. You nod, because he sounds very sure, and because arguing theology with a man holding keys rarely ends well. Some objects are clearly older than their stories. Others are clearly newer. A few look suspiciously like they were made last winter by someone with woodworking skills and ambition. But age is difficult to prove, and faith does not require carbon dating. You begin to understand that monasteries are not lying exactly. They are curating belief. They provide tangible anchors for invisible ideas. People want to see faith, to touch it, to know it exists somewhere specific. A monastery that can offer that will never be empty. As you leave, the monk reminds you that donations help preserve these treasures for future generations. He says this kindly, sincerely. You give something because you enjoyed the tour and because part of you wants the system to keep working. It is comforting, in a way, predictable, structured, holy. Outside, the world feels louder, messier. You think back to the shelves of relics multiplying quietly in stone halls. You realize the objects themselves matter less than what they represent. Stability, meaning, a promise that someone, somewhere, has kept track of the important things. And as long as that promise holds, the holy objects will continue to appear, neatly labeled, endlessly convincing, and always just enough to go around. You lean over a table where a map is spread flat, its edges curled from importance rather than age. The paper smells faintly of ink and ambition. Rivers curve gracefully across the surface. Forests cluster politely, and borders sit exactly where they ought to, according to someone who sounds very sure of themselves. The man beside you traces a finger along a line and tells you this land is fertile, peaceful, and available, which are three words that rarely travel together without supervision. Maps are persuasive because they look calm. They present the world as organized, measured, obedient to rulers and pens. The hills do not argue. The swamps do not complain. Everything fits neatly into inked shapes, and that alone feels trustworthy. You find yourself nodding, because the map does not stutter or hesitate. It just exists, quietly insisting that reality should match it eventually. The land being sold is far away, far enough that you cannot easily check it, far enough that stories fill the distance. The seller describes rolling fields, clean water, and friendly locals who will definitely respect your claim once you arrive with the proper documents. He speaks of opportunity with the ease of someone who will not be joining you on the journey. You notice how flexible boundaries are. A border shifts slightly depending on who is asking. A forest grows or shrinks with the price. A river conveniently changes direction between editions. Maps are redrawn often and questioned rarely. If two maps disagree, the newer one usually wins, especially if it is cleaner. Land scams work because land feels solid. You can picture it. You can stand on it in your mind. Owning land means permanence, stability, a future that stays put. When someone offers that in a world constantly rearranging itself, it is hard not to listen. You watch a deal unfold. A buyer hands over coins. A document is signed. A seal is pressed. Ownership is declared with a confidence that would be impressive if it were not so portable. The buyer smiles, already imagining fences, crops, maybe a house with a roof that does not leak. The seller smiles too, but for different reasons. Later, you hear stories. The land is underwater half the year. The locals do not recognize the borders. Someone else owns it, or several people do, depending on which map they trust. The buyer arrives with papers and confidence and is met with confusion, hostility, or laughter. The map does not help then. It never does. Sometimes the land exists exactly as promised. It is just already claimed by a lord, by a monastery, by a village that has been there longer than anyone remembers. Paper ownership collides with lived reality, and lived reality tends to win, though not without bruises. You notice how sellers deflect responsibility. They sold land on paper, not experience. The map was accurate at the time, which is a wonderfully elastic phrase. Circumstances change, rivers flood, borders move, kings die. None of this is their fault. They provided information, not guarantees. There is humor in the precision of the deception. Measurements down to the foot, detailed legends, decorative flourishes. The more elaborate the map, the easier it is to forget that someone drew it with a hand that could just as easily shift a line. Maps feel objective, but they are opinions dressed as facts. You see how entire regions are sold this way. Colonies promised, estates invented, futures sketched confidently over terrain no one in the room has ever walked. The farther the land, the bolder the claims. Distance protects the lie, yet people keep buying. Because land is hope you can point to. Even when it is imaginary, it feels more responsible than dreaming. A map gives permission to believe that tomorrow has coordinates. As you fold the map carefully and hand it back, you understand that the scam is not the land, it is the certainty. The promise that the world can be flattened, labeled, and owned without complication. Maps do not lie because they are evil. They lie because you want them to. You sit on a hard wooden bench that has been worn smooth by centuries of nervous shifting. The courtroom smells like ink, dust, and old authority. Light filters in through high windows, catching motes of dirt that drift lazily, unconcerned with justice. At the front of the room, a judge presides with the expression of a man who has already decided that truth is inconvenient, but procedure is comforting. One by one, witnesses are called. Not neighbors, not passers-by, professionals. Men who make their living remembering things that never happened. They step forward confidently, swear oaths with practiced rhythm, and begin to speak in voices tuned carefully between sincerity and boredom. You notice how smoothly the words come. No pauses. No searching for memory. These stories have been told many times before. The first witness describes an event in exquisite detail. The weather, the time of day, who stood where, what was said. He remembers colors, gestures, even expressions on faces that should have been forgettable. It is impressive. It is also impossible. You were there that day, and none of this occurred. But the witness does not look like a liar. He looks like a craftsman. You glance around the room. The clerk writes steadily. The judge nods. The opposing party frowns at exactly the right moments. Everyone is playing their role, and the script is familiar enough to feel safe. Truth is not the goal here. Resolution is. Courts do not exist to uncover reality. They exist to conclude disputes in a way that feels official. Another witness steps forward and confirms the first story perfectly, down to the angle of the sun. This is not coincidence. This is rehearsal. Their memories align like documents copied from the same source. Consistency is valued more than accuracy. Two identical lies beat one messy truth every time. You begin to understand how this works. Witnesses are paid, fed, protected. They are reliable. Real witnesses are unpredictable. They forget details, get emotional, contradict themselves. Professional witnesses are clean. They deliver exactly what is required. Nothing more, nothing less. There is humor in the seriousness with which everyone treats this performance. Objections are raised. Clarifications requested. The witness adjusts a detail slightly, like an actor responding to direction. The court hums with the quiet satisfaction of a machine running as intended. You feel a flicker of frustration, but it is muted by the weight of the room. Challenging this would require evidence, influence, and stamina. You have none of those. The witnesses have credentials, experience, and the confidence that comes from knowing the system prefers them. The judge thanks the witness for his service to truth. The phrase lands oddly in your ears. Truth, here, is something that can be served like a document or a meal. It is not something you discover. It is something you present. You notice how memory itself has become a commodity. These men are not just lying. They are selling certainty. They provide a version of events that fits neatly into legal frameworks. No loose ends. No ambiguity. The past becomes orderly under their care. When the verdict is delivered, it feels inevitable. The ruling is read aloud, inked, sealed. Reality adjusts to match it. Land changes hands. Blame is assigned. Consequences unfold. The witnesses step away, already forgetting the story they just told, because they will tell another tomorrow. As the room empties, you sit for a moment longer. You realize that the most unsettling part is not the dishonesty. It is how calm it all feels. No shouting, no chaos. Just quiet agreement that this version of events will do. Outside, life continues. People argue about prices, weather, neighbors. None of them know that history was rewritten a few steps away by men who specialize in remembering convincingly. You stand and leave the courtroom, carrying the understanding that in places like this, facts are negotiable, memory is rentable, and justice is often just the best story told with a straight face. You step into a counting house that smells faintly of ink, wool, and confidence that has never touched a battlefield. The walls are thick, the doors reinforced, but the real security lives on the tables. Ledgers, rows of careful handwriting, columns that promise order in a world allergic to it. Somewhere in this room, wealth exists without being visible, and that alone feels like sorcery. The banker greets you warmly, because warmth suggests trust, and trust is the real deposit here. He explains that carrying coins is dangerous, heavy, inconvenient, likely to attract the wrong kind of attention from men with knives and flexible morals. Instead, you can leave your metal here and carry paper. Paper that says you own something somewhere else. Paper that weighs nothing and somehow means everything. You watch as coins are counted, weighed, inspected, then locked away. The sound is satisfying, solid, reassuring, but the magic happens afterward. When the banker writes your name into a book and hands you a note, the note is small, neat, and unremarkable. And yet, with it, you can buy grain, hire guards, or fund a voyage without touching a single coin again. Wealth has become an idea. This is how money starts to move faster than metal. Letters of credit pass between cities. Promises cross borders. A merchant in one town honors a mark made by a man he has never met because the mark is familiar, because it looks official, because everyone else accepts it. The system feeds itself. You notice how rarely the coins are actually retrieved. Most transactions cancel each other out in ink. One debt offsets another. Balances shift. The metal sits quietly in vaults, bored and unnecessary. The banker smiles when you ask about it and explains that movement is inefficient. Paper is elegant. There is humor in how serious everyone pretends this is not a gamble. The banker insists the funds are safe. Even as he lends them out multiple times to multiple people, he assures each borrower that their credit is solid, because solid is a feeling, not a measurement. As long as no one panics at the same time, everything works beautifully. And panic, of course, is bad for business. You follow a transaction from one city to another and watch it transform. A letter becomes a signature becomes a promise becomes a debt. The original coins are never mentioned again. They might as well be mythological at this point. Dragons sleeping under stone. Banking schemes flourish because they solve a real problem and create a new one quietly on the side. They allow trade to expand beyond physical limits. They also allow risk to multiply invisibly. When it works, it looks like genius. When it fails, it looks like a riot. You hear whispers of bankers overextending, of loans stacked on loans, of fortunes built on confidence alone. Kings borrow for wars they cannot afford. Merchants speculate on shipments that have not arrived. Everyone assumes tomorrow will behave itself. Tomorrow rarely agrees. Still, people line up. Because this system feels modern, clean, intelligent. It makes the world seem manageable. You can own things you cannot touch. You can lose things without ever seeing them. It all happens quietly, politely, behind closed doors. When a bank collapses, it collapses loudly. Crowds gather. Shouting replaces ink. People demand their metal back and are shocked to learn it has been elsewhere for some time. The ledgers suddenly feel less comforting. The banker looks smaller. Confidence evaporates faster than trust ever did. But even then, the idea survives. New banks open. New notes circulate. The language adjusts. Safeguards are promised. Everyone insists this time is different. It always is, briefly. As you leave the counting house, you realize you have witnessed something powerful. Money no longer needs to exist to control lives. It only needs to be believed in. Metal was heavy. Belief is light, portable, and dangerously efficient. You step back into the street carrying nothing but paper and the understanding that from now on, fortunes will rise and fall without ever making a sound. You find yourself in a square where desperation gathers like pigeons. People linger longer than they meant to, leaning on canes, clutching ribs, rubbing joints that have memorized pain. At the center stands a table draped in cloth, and behind it a man who looks like health itself decided to grow a beard and start talking. His voice is smooth, confident, and just loud enough to carry hope without sounding like effort. He calls his product a cure, which is a bold word here. Cures are rare. Illness is common. That imbalance alone gives him an advantage. He holds up a small bottle filled with something cloudy and explains that it was discovered through ancient wisdom, foreign knowledge, or divine inspiration, depending on which story lands best with the crowd. The details shift slightly with each telling, but the conclusion is always the same. This works. You watch people lean in. A woman asks if it helps with breathing. Yes. A man asks about fevers. Absolutely. Someone else mutters about curses. The seller pauses thoughtfully, then nods. Especially curses. The bottle does not discriminate. It is generous like that. The humor arrives quietly. He claims the potion tastes unpleasant because effective things always do. This prepares the buyer for disappointment in advance and reframes suffering as progress. If it burns, it is working. If it does nothing, it is working invisibly. If it makes things worse, that is the illness fighting back. The cure never loses. It simply adapts. You notice how the seller never promises speed. Healing takes time. Patience is required. Another bottle might help accelerate the process, but only if taken correctly, and correctly reminds you suspiciously of purchasing more. The instructions are vague enough to avoid blame and precise enough to sound scientific. Coins change hands. Bottles disappear into pockets. The seller's posture relaxes slightly with each sale. His poverty is visibly retreating. The crowd thins as people leave, clutching hope in glass. Later, you see them again. The woman still wheezes. The man still limps. Someone insists they feel a little better, though it might just be the relief of having tried something. Placebo works best when no one calls it that. Miracle cures thrive because illness is exhausting. It wears people down until even improbable solutions sound reasonable. Doctors are expensive. Time is unreliable. Faith is faster. A bottle you can hold feels more actionable than a diagnosis you cannot afford. You learn that sellers often believe in their cures at first. They notice coincidences. Someone recovers naturally and credits the potion. Someone else stops complaining. The seller's confidence grows, fed by selective memory and louder success stories. Failures are quieter. They go home and rest. There is a rhythm to the pitch. Testimonials come first. A friend healed, a cousin restored, a stranger dramatically improved but sadly moved away. Proof exists, just not nearby. The crowd nods, because distance is an excellent substitute for evidence. Authorities sometimes intervene. Occasionally, when they do, the seller disappears for a while and returns under a new name with the same bottle and a slightly different story. Illness does not keep records, neither do most people. You notice how language does the heavy lifting. Natural, traditional, proven, ancient. These words mean very little and feel like a lot. They sound safer than whatever caused the illness in the first place. Unknown remedies feel better than known suffering. As the day wears on, the seller packs up, lighter in spirit and heavier in purse. The square empties. Life resumes its uncomfortable baseline. The cures are taken faithfully, then forgotten quietly. You realize that miracle cures do not need to heal bodies to succeed. They only need to move money from the sick to the confident. They offer control in situations where control is scarce. Even a false solution feels better than none. In the end, the only visible recovery is the seller's circumstances. He walks away upright, unburdened, already planning the next town. And the crowd, still aching, returns home with empty bottles and the lingering sense that at least they tried. You walk through an arched doorway that smells like chalk, damp stone, and ambition wearing borrowed robes. Above you hangs a banner with Latin words long enough to feel important and vague enough to discourage translation. This, you are told, is a university. Not the kind with traditions or students who ask questions, but the kind that understands the market. Knowledge is slow. Credentials are fast. Inside, men sit on benches pretending to listen. Some nod thoughtfully. Others squint at parchment like it might blink first. A few hold books upside down with remarkable confidence. No one corrects them. Correction would interrupt the illusion, and the illusion is the product. A man at the front speaks in a voice designed to sound scholarly. He uses phrases like classical wisdom and established authority. He references thinkers everyone has heard of and ideas no one plans to check. The lecture lasts just long enough to justify the fee. Understanding is optional. Attendance is not. You quickly realize that this place does not teach. It confers. Degrees are granted not for mastery, but for payment, posture, and the ability to sit still long enough to look serious. The curriculum is flexible. Law, medicine, philosophy, theology. You choose what sounds most impressive in your social circle. The price adjusts accordingly. You watch a man sign his name with an X and receive a certificate declaring him educated. The ink dries. Applause follows. No one laughs, because everyone here understands the arrangement. This is not about learning. It is about legitimacy. Fake universities thrive because education has become a symbol. A degree suggests competence without requiring demonstration. It opens doors, settles arguments, and ends conversations. If you have the paper, you have the authority. If you have the authority, no one asks whether you earned it. The humor sits in the details. Professors who cannot read fluently lecture on texts they have never opened. Graduates mispronounce their own titles with pride. A man introduces himself as a doctor of something he cannot spell. The room nods respectfully. Respect is contagious when no one wants to be the first to doubt. These institutions advertise discreetly. Word spreads among merchants, officials, and anyone who needs credibility quickly. A promotion looms. A court case approaches. A rival has letters after his name. This is the solution. Affordable, efficient, immediate. You notice how carefully the process mimics real education. There are ceremonies, caps, Latin phrases repeated like spells. Ritual creates memory, and memory creates belief. By the time the degree is handed over, it feels earned simply because effort was simulated convincingly. Authorities sometimes object, but enforcement is inconsistent. Many officials purchase their own credentials this way. Challenging the system risks unraveling personal histories. It is easier to ignore the problem than investigate the paperwork holding up half the bureaucracy. You follow a graduate into the world beyond the doorway. He walks taller, speaks slower, corrects others with confidence he did not possess yesterday. The degree works immediately. People listen. Doors open. Responsibility is assigned to someone deeply unprepared. There are consequences, of course. Incompetent doctors, confident advisors, officials who quote laws they misunderstand. But failure is often blamed on circumstance, not credentials. The degree remains intact. Paper outlives outcomes. You begin to see how this spreads. Once one person benefits, others follow. No one wants to be left behind by a system that rewards appearance over ability. Education becomes theater. Knowledge becomes optional. Inside the university, another ceremony begins. New students arrive, eager, nervous, illiterate. The banner hangs patiently. The man at the front clears his throat and starts again. The machine hums along, converting money into authority with impressive efficiency. As you step back into the street, you understand why this scam endures. Learning is hard, pretending is easy, and in a world that values certainty over truth, a degree that looks right is often enough. You glance once more at the doorway, at the banner, at the quiet transaction of ignorance into influence, and you realize that the most dangerous part is not that these men cannot read. It is that no one plans to ask them to. You set out on a pilgrimage believing the road itself has meaning, that every step is deliberate, ancient, sanctified by millions of feet before yours. The path feels official because it is marked. Stones carved with symbols, signs nailed to posts, a map blessed by someone with authority. You trust it because everyone else does, and because questioning a holy road feels like questioning gravity. The first thing you notice is how convenient the route is. It passes through towns with inns just far enough apart to justify staying the night. It bends slightly toward markets that seem unusually well stocked for places this remote. Shrines appear at predictable intervals, each one requesting a small donation, nothing excessive, just enough to feel polite. The road does not rush you, it guides you gently, like a hand on your back, steering you toward opportunity. You walk beside others who believe they are following something ancient and immutable. No one mentions that the path has shifted, that last year it went another way, that 2 decades ago it avoided this valley entirely. Pilgrimage routes, you learn, are living things. They adapt, quietly. A monk explains that the road was adjusted for safety. Bandits, weather, unstable terrain, all very reasonable. He does not mention the new toll bridge owned by a local lord who donated generously to the monastery. He does not point out that the old path bypassed 3 towns now thriving on pilgrim traffic. The road, like scripture, benefits from interpretation. You notice how stories attach themselves to locations along the way. This rock marks where a saint rested. That spring healed someone important once. The stories feel slightly rushed, like they were workshopped quickly, but they are repeated with confidence. Confidence does the heavy lifting. Pilgrims stop. They listen. They pay. There is humor in how earnestly everyone pretends this was always the way. An innkeeper swears his family has hosted pilgrims for generations, even though the building smells suspiciously new. A vendor claims his relics were blessed specifically because the road now passes his door. Timing, it seems, is also divine. The redesigned route funnels people efficiently. You are rarely alone. Crowds form where crowds are profitable. Bottlenecks appear near donation boxes. Narrow paths lead you past stalls selling food, charms, certificates of completion. Proof you were here. Proof you did the work. Proof is important when belief is intangible. You begin to realize that the pilgrimage is less about destination and more about consumption. Every stop asks something of you. A coin, a prayer, a purchase. Individually, it feels harmless. Collectively, it adds up. The road is not bleeding you dry. It is sipping steadily. No one forces you. That would break the spell. Instead, the route makes generosity feel like part of the ritual. Refusing feels awkward, almost disrespectful. Everyone else is giving. Everyone else is buying. Surely they know something you do not. You hear rumors of the old path. Quieter, harder, fewer amenities. Fewer miracles too, apparently. The stories insist that holiness flows where people go, not the other way around. This is very convenient for whoever controls where people go. Pilgrimage routes thrive on repetition. Once enough feet follow a path, it becomes tradition. Once it becomes tradition, it becomes untouchable. Questioning it feels like sacrilege. The road does not need to be ancient. It only needs to feel inevitable. You reach a checkpoint where a certificate is offered. Proof of devotion, proof of distance traveled. The paper is stamped with an impressive seal. You watch people clutch it with pride. The journey is now official, validated, complete. Later, you learn that the certificate is accepted at inns and churches along the way. Discounts, privileges, respect. The paper matters more than the blisters. The system is efficient. Walk, pay, receive proof, repeat. As you near the end of the pilgrimage, you feel accomplished and oddly lighter, mostly in the purse. You have prayed, you have walked, you have participated fully, and yet, part of you wonders whether the road led you closer to enlightenment or simply past a well-organized series of opportunities. The final shrine is crowded. Donations pour in. The monks smile, tired smiles of professionals who have seen this many times today. You kneel, because everyone else is kneeling, and because after this long, standing out feels unnecessary. When you finally turn back, you look over your shoulder at the road winding away. It looks ancient. It looks holy. It looks exactly like a path designed by people who understood that belief travels best when it stops often and spends freely. And you understand then that the greatest trick was never changing the destination. It was moving the road. You step into a dockside office that smells like salt, ink, and optimism that has learned to wear a straight face. Outside, ships creak gently in their berths, very much afloat, very much alive. Inside, those same ships are already dead on paper, sunk heroically by storms that never happened and waves that never rose higher than a bored seagull. A man with tidy handwriting explains insurance to you as if it is a public service. The sea is dangerous, he says. God is unpredictable. Wood rots, sails tear. Anything can happen out there. He pauses just long enough for the idea to settle, then adds that this is why one must be prepared. Prepared looks a lot like a contract. You watch merchants insure cargo they plan to deliver safely. You also watch others insure cargo they quietly hope will fail in a very specific way. The policy is clear enough to sound fair and vague enough to invite creativity. Losses will be compensated. Circumstances will be evaluated. Witnesses will be consulted, preferably ones who owe favors. The scam does not feel like a scam at first. It feels like prudence, a safety net, a way to sleep at night. And that is exactly how it grows. Ships sail, some return, some do not. And some return twice, once in reality and once as a tragedy documented in ink. You learn how it works by listening to what is not said. A merchant insures a vessel for more than it is worth. He loads it with cargo listed generously and measured loosely. The ship departs. Somewhere along the route, nothing happens at all. The ship docks quietly in another port under a different name. The cargo is sold. Meanwhile, back home, a storm is described with impressive detail. Affidavits appear. A sailor swears the mast snapped like a toothpick. Another confirms the waves were monstrous. A third remembers praying very hard. No one mentions the calm weather reported by every other vessel that day. Memory, you realize, is flexible when money is involved. The insurer frowns gravely and pays out, because this is the cost of doing business. Losses are expected. Faith in the system must be maintained. Questioning every claim would slow trade and invite uncomfortable questions about previous payments. Better to accept a few imaginary shipwrecks than unravel the entire operation. There is humor in how dramatic the paperwork becomes. Ink describes oceans furious with intent. Storms develop personalities. Ships do not simply sink. They fight bravely and lose. The sea is always at fault. It cannot defend itself. You watch clerks copy reports without reading them closely. Volume matters more than accuracy. The faster claims are processed, the more legitimate the system feels. Speed creates confidence. Confidence creates more clients. Some schemes are even simpler. A ship never leaves port at all. It is insured, reported lost, and quietly dismantled for parts. The wood becomes furniture. The sails become curtains. The anchor finds new work holding something else in place. The ship lives on, just not as itself. Others push the idea further. Entire fleets are insured, shuffled, renamed, and reborn. Paper ships sink constantly. Real ships keep sailing. The ledgers fill with tragedy, while the docks remain crowded. Insurance scams thrive because they are polite. No one is robbed at knife point. No violence is required. Everything happens with signatures and seals. Even the victims are not quite victims. Insurers build losses into their calculations. Premiums rise. Everyone pays a little more. The cost dissolves into the background like a tax no one voted on. You begin to see why this spreads so easily. It requires trust, but not much of it, just enough to keep things moving. The rest is covered by tradition and the shared understanding that the sea is dangerous and paperwork is convincing. Occasionally, someone is caught. A witness contradicts himself. A ship is spotted alive after its official demise. There is outrage, a trial, a punishment severe enough to reassure the public and light enough to avoid scaring investors. The system survives, slightly embarrassed and otherwise unchanged. As you leave the office, you look out at the harbor again. Masts sway, ropes creak, life continues. Somewhere, a clerk is describing a ship's final moments in loving detail, while that same ship unloads spices 2 ports away. You understand then that early insurance does not exist to prevent loss. It exists to make loss profitable, even when it never happens at all. You stand at the edge of a crowd gathered around a man who looks exhausted in a holy way. His hair is uncombed on purpose. His eyes have the practiced intensity of someone who has seen too much, or at least rehearsed it. He raises his hands, and the murmuring softens. Silence falls with the weight of expectation. He tells you disaster is coming. Not immediately, but soon enough to feel urgent. Floods, fire, famine, war. He is flexible on the specifics because catastrophe is a generous category. Something terrible is always nearby if you describe it broadly enough. The crowd leans in, because fear listens better than hope. You notice how carefully he balances terror and timing. The end is not tomorrow. That would be inconvenient. It is just far enough away to allow preparation. Preparation, as it turns out, looks a lot like contributions. Supplies cost money. Warnings require travel. Messages must be spread. None of this is free, and the universe, unfortunately, does not accept promises. He speaks of visions received at great personal cost. Sleepless nights, trembling hands, a burden placed upon him alone. The implication is clear. If you had seen what he saw, you would also be standing here asking strangers for coins with alarming intensity. People ask questions. Will their town be spared? Possibly. Can their family be protected? There are measures. Is there time? For now, the answers are never definitive. Certainty would end the conversation too quickly. The humor hides in the logistics. He warns of famine while standing beside a table of bread purchased with earlier donations. He predicts fire while wearing robes freshly laundered by someone else's labor. The apocalypse is always imminent, yet somehow organized enough to include a collection basket. You watch as coins drop. Some people give out of fear, others out of guilt. A few because everyone else is doing it and standing still feels dangerous. The prophet thanks them gravely, promising that generosity will be remembered when the reckoning arrives, by whom is left pleasantly vague. Disaster prophecy thrives because it offers meaning to chaos. Bad things happen constantly. Predicting them makes someone look wise when they eventually do. If nothing happens, the explanation is simple. The donations worked. Catastrophe was averted. Everyone wins, especially the prophet. You learn that predictions are adjusted quietly over time. Dates shift. Details evolve. New revelations clarify earlier misunderstandings. Memory is cooperative when survival is the theme. No one wants to admit they paid to avoid a future that never existed. There is a rhythm to the speech. Build tension. Pause. Offer relief. Repeat. The relief is always conditional. Stay vigilant. Keep giving. Remain faithful. The threat never fully resolves, because resolution would end the income stream. You notice that the prophet is rarely alone. Assistants move through the crowd, nodding sympathetically, collecting offerings, distributing pamphlets. Organization gives legitimacy. If this were nonsense, surely it would look messier. Authorities sometimes tolerate these figures. Fear is useful. It keeps people compliant. Occasionally, a prophecy sparks unrest, and the prophet is asked to relocate, which he does readily, carrying his message to a fresh audience with fewer questions. You follow the crowd as it disperses. Some look shaken, some comforted, a few energized by the sense that they are part of something important. Believing you are warned feels better than believing you are helpless. Later, when a storm floods a nearby field or a disease spreads through the region, people remember the words. They forget the timing. They forget the specifics. They remember the feeling of having been told. That memory is enough to justify future donations. You begin to understand that prophets selling disaster are not predicting the end of the world. They are managing anxiety. They convert uncertainty into a transaction. Pay now, worry later. As the sun lowers, the prophet packs up. The world has not ended today, which is ideal. Tomorrow remains available for alarm. He walks away heavier with coin and lighter with responsibility. You stand where he stood and look at the sky. It is unchanged. Clouds drift. Birds argue. Life continues with no awareness of the schedule it was supposed to follow. And you realize that the true prediction was never about disaster. It was about how easily fear opens wallets when it wears the mask of salvation. You hear it before you see it. The wrong sound. Coins should sing when they meet stone. A bright, honest ring that tells you weight and metal agree with each other. These do not. They land with a dull clack, like a promise clearing its throat. No one says anything at first. Silence is safer than accusation. You are in a market where money has begun to misbehave. Merchants weigh coins twice, then a third time just to be polite. Fingers linger longer than necessary, nails scraping edges, eyes narrowing at surfaces that look right but feel slightly offended by inspection. Trade slows, voices lower, trust tightens. The counterfeiters are not artists chasing beauty. They are engineers of doubt. Their coins are almost correct, close enough to pass in poor light or busy hands. A little less silver, a little more hope. They understand that perfection would attract scrutiny, but plausibility slides through unnoticed. You watch a baker refuse a handful of coins and immediately lose a customer. The customer argues. The baker shrugs. Hunger meets suspicion, and neither wins. This is how entire regions begin to wobble, not with violence, but with hesitation. Counterfeit coins spread faster than truth because they look like truth. They carry familiar faces, familiar symbols, the comforting weight of habit. Kings stamped their authority onto metal, believing it would last forever. The counterfeiters stamp doubt onto the same surface and watch authority flinch. You follow the trail backward. It leads away from the market into workshops that smell like smoke and secrecy. Here, molds are pressed, metals melted, edges filed just enough to suggest wear. The work is careful, repetitive, almost devotional. These people are not stealing coins. They are manufacturing confusion. The humor, if it can be called that, lives in how quickly blame travels. Merchants accuse peasants. Peasants accuse travelers. Travelers accuse foreign lands. Borders tighten. Prices rise. Everyone agrees something is wrong, and no one agrees who caused it. The counterfeiters are invisible by design. You notice how rulers respond. Some issue new coins with grander designs and heavier weight. Others recall old currency, plunging markets into chaos overnight. A few blame conspiracies and execute the wrong people publicly, hoping fear will stabilize what confidence no longer can. Nothing works immediately. Once doubt enters circulation, it does not obey decrees. People hoard good coins and spend bad ones. Quality disappears from the streets. The worst money becomes the most common. Trade becomes an exercise in avoidance. You see soldiers paid in suspect coin. Their loyalty thins. You see taxes collected reluctantly, counted endlessly, still questioned. The state begins to feel lighter than it should, as if authority itself has been diluted. Counterfeiters thrive in this environment. They do not need everyone to believe. They only need enough people to hesitate. Every pause costs time. Every delay costs trust. Trust is expensive to rebuild and cheap to destroy. There are moments of absurdity. A merchant tests a coin by biting it, then admits he does not know what he is looking for. Another drops coins into water, watching bubbles like an amateur prophet reading the future. Methods multiply. Certainty does not. Eventually, the damage shows itself clearly. Trade routes reroute, towns decline, markets shrink, people revert to barter, hauling goods through streets that once hummed with exchange. Progress unravels quietly. When counterfeiters are caught, they are punished severely. Mutilation, execution, public spectacle meant to reassure everyone that order has returned. It never fully does. The memory of bad money lingers longer than the criminals who made it. You realize then that counterfeit coins are not just theft. They are sabotage. They attack the invisible agreement that lets strangers cooperate. They turn every transaction into a small trial. As you leave the market, you hear the clack again. Another coin, another question. You do not look back because you already know the answer. The metal is wrong. And now everything built on it has to prove itself again. You sit in a hall dressed for celebration, where banners hang heavy with borrowed symbols and family crests look just a little too freshly painted. Marriage here is not romance. It is infrastructure. It connects land to land, debt to forgiveness, armies to silence. And bloodlines, you are told, are everything. The bride enters wearing a genealogy as carefully arranged as her veil. Names are whispered like prayers. Great-grandparents allegedly fought in famous wars. An uncle supposedly dined with royalty. A distant cousin once stood near a king and survived. Which counts? No one asks for proof, because proof is impolite and enthusiasm fills the gaps nicely. You watch the groom nod solemnly, pretending he understands the lineage being recited. He does not. It is long. It is impressive. It is mostly fiction, but fiction delivered confidently has a way of becoming fact by the end of a feast. Marriage scams flourish because records are fragile and memory is flexible. Fires happen. Wars interrupt archives. Documents go missing. Into that absent step, professional ancestors. People who know how to invent a past, sturdy enough to hold a dowry. You learn that entire families are constructed on parchment. Seals pressed into wax. Signatures practiced until they look tired and old. A name added to a lineage can change everything. Suddenly land is justified. Titles make sense. Ambition gains permission. There is humor in how casually everyone participates. A herald announces noble connections with theatrical flair, rolling syllables like they might roll downhill and pick up legitimacy along the way. Guests murmur approval, not because they believe every word, but because believing keeps the wine flowing. The scammers are careful. They do not claim too much. No direct descent from emperors. That would invite questions. Instead, they settle for proximity. A cousin, a steward, someone who once mattered enough to justify influence now. Plausibility is the goal, not grandeur. You see the transaction beneath the ceremony. Land transfers, alliances formed, old disputes quietly buried under fresh vows. The bloodline is the key that unlocks it all. Whether it is real barely matters once the papers are signed. Some marriages are arranged entirely around these inventions. A family with money but no name purchases a past. A family with a name but no money accepts it gratefully. Everyone gets what they want. Truth is the only guest not invited. Occasionally, the lie surfaces. A rival produces a contradictory document. A monk remembers differently. A disgruntled relative speaks up after too much wine. Panic ripples briefly, then settles. By this point, the alliance is useful. Exposing it would hurt too many people. Silence becomes tradition. You notice how quickly false bloodlines harden. Children are born into them. They grow up hearing the stories. They repeat them without knowing they were once invented for a fee. After a generation, the lie feels inherited. After two, it is untouchable. There is a moment during the feast when you realize no one here truly wants the truth. Truth complicates contracts. Truth raises questions. The story works better. It keeps estates intact and arguments theoretical. The scammers themselves rarely stay. They move on to the next town, the next family eager to climb. Their work persists behind them, embedded in family trees like a graft that took. You imagine future historians squinting at records, confused but resigned. Marriage scams endure because lineage is abstract. You cannot weigh it. You cannot test it. You can only agree on it collectively, and once agreed upon, it becomes powerful enough to start wars or prevent them. As the night deepens, the music grows louder and the laughter easier. The newly allied families toast to shared heritage, newly discovered and conveniently aligned. Glasses clink, smiles hold. You step outside into cooler air and look back at the hall glowing with celebration. Inside, futures are being negotiated on foundations no one plans to inspect again. The couple dances, unaware or unconcerned. Their children will inherit the story. Their grandchildren will defend it fiercely, and the bloodline, false or not, will continue doing exactly what it was designed to do. You arrive in a town that smells faintly of incense and anticipation. People are already whispering, which is how you know something holy is about to happen. Holiness, like a market day, benefits from advance notice. A platform has been built, candles wait unlit. Someone has painted a halo on a piece of wood that looks suspiciously new. They tell you a saint has appeared. Not lived, appeared. The distinction matters because it skips inconvenient steps like proof, history, and death. This saint is recent, local, and very responsive to community needs. He manifested just outside town, exactly where the road bends and pilgrims naturally slow down. A miracle of logistics, if nothing else. You watch as the story assembles itself in real time. Someone claims to have seen a glow. Someone else confirms a voice. A third person admits they did not see anything but felt something. Which counts more because feelings cannot be questioned without seeming rude. Within an hour, the saint has a personality, a preference for modest donations, and a strong opinion about where his shrine should be built. Demand creates saints the way hunger creates bakers. When the last holy figure grows distant, inconveniently dead, or no longer profitable, a new one arrives. This one specializes in current problems, crops failing, children sick, taxes unbearable. He understands modern suffering. The humor lies in how efficiently it all unfolds. The relics appear almost immediately. A scrap of cloth, a footprint in soft ground, a walking stick conveniently discovered behind the tavern. No one asks how a saint managed to leave behind so many personal items in such a short time. Miracles are busy like that. You notice the clergy adjusting quickly. Some are skeptical at first, but skepticism softens when offerings increase. The saint is cautiously endorsed. Investigations are promised later. Later is a flexible concept. For now, the crowds are good for everyone. Stories begin to circulate with impressive speed. A woman claims her pain eased after praying. A man swears his luck improved. Someone else insists their neighbor's cousin was healed completely, which is the strongest kind of evidence because it cannot be verified before lunch. Fake saints thrive because people want proximity. Ancient saints are impressive but distant. Their miracles happened elsewhere, long ago, to people with inconveniently foreign names. A local saint understands local accents. He suffers where you suffer. He listens. You watch as the schedule fills. Feast days assigned, processions planned. Vendors set up stalls selling candles, medallions, and small printed prayers featuring the saint's face, which has already settled into a standard depiction. He looks humble. He looks tired. He looks market-tested. Skeptics exist, of course. They mutter about fabrication and coincidence. They are drowned out by singing. Music is louder than doubt. Also, skepticism does not cure anyone, and the saint, allegedly, might. You learn that timing is everything. Saints appear during droughts, wars, plagues, and moments when morale dips low enough to need intervention. They retire quietly when conditions improve or when another saint nearby offers better benefits. Occasionally, the saint is investigated officially. Witnesses are interviewed, stories compared, inconsistencies emerge. The glow might have been a lantern. The voice could have been a man shouting uphill. The footprint matches a common shoe. The saint fades politely into obscurity, but not before a chapel is built, not before donations are collected, not before a festival is established that no one wants to cancel afterward. The saint may be declared unofficial, but the infrastructure remains. Belief leaves behind real estate. You realize that fake saints are not accidents. They are responses. They fill gaps left by distant authority and slow solutions. When people need hope urgently, authenticity becomes optional. As evening falls, you stand among the crowd, watching candles flicker. The saint is invoked again, thanked for his presence, asked politely to remain available. You join in, because standing silently feels like dissent, and dissent is exhausting. Later, walking away, you pass the place where the saint allegedly appeared. It looks ordinary now. Just a patch of ground, slightly trampled, already marked with a small sign explaining its significance. You understand then that saints do not appear because they are real. They appear because belief has a schedule, and someone is always ready to meet demand. You walk the boundary at dawn, because boundaries prefer quiet. The mist hangs low over fields that look the same as they always have. Hedges breathing softly, paths worn smooth by generations of feet that never asked permission. This land fed people. This land remembers them. Paper does not. A man arrives with papers rolled tight, like a promise that does not want to be questioned. He speaks gently, which is how authority avoids sounding like force. He explains that the land has been reclassified, improved, enclosed. Words that suggest care while doing the opposite. The ink is fresh, the seals are heavy, the meaning is final. You watch peasants gather, hands rough, faces careful. They listen as if listening might change the outcome. The man points to lines drawn on parchment that do not match the lines of the field. He says the old paths were informal, inefficient, unrecorded. The new map is official, which makes it truer than memory. There is humor in how the fraud dresses itself as progress. Enclosure promises productivity, order, profit. The fields will be managed better now, by someone who has never bent to pull weeds. The sheep will be happier. The grain will be optimized. People are not mentioned because people complicate calculations. You see how it works. A lord claims unused land, common land. No one owns it, which means someone can. The paperwork cites charters few can read and witnesses no one remembers. A boundary stone is moved at night. A hedge is extended politely. By the time anyone notices, the map agrees with itself. The peasants protest quietly. Loud protest is expensive. They are told they can stay as tenants. This sounds generous until the rent is named. They are told they can move. This sounds reasonable until you remember they have nowhere else to go. Paper erases efficiently. It does not bleed. It does not shout. It simply declares. The land that was always there becomes something new because someone wrote it so. The old rights dissolve like fog under morning sun, not because they were weak, but because they were unwritten. You follow the process through a court where no mud enters and no boots have ever been worn. Clerks copy claims with steady hands. They do not know the fields. They know margins. The decision is tidy. The enclosure stands. Everyone nods, relieved to have concluded something. Outside, fences rise. Straight lines replace crooked ones that followed streams and stories. Paths are blocked, gates locked. The land does not argue, but people do, softly at first. Soft arguments are ignored. You notice how hunger enters quietly after. A goat has nowhere to graze. Firewood becomes theft. Gathering berries becomes trespass. Crimes appear where survival used to be. Punishment follows. The system congratulates itself on maintaining order. The fraud continues because it looks legal, because it arrives with stamps, because it speaks the language of improvement, and because the people it removes lack the language to object in ways that count. There are moments of absurdity. A man fined for walking the same route his grandmother walked. A woman arrested for collecting fallen branches from a forest that used to be shared. A sign nailed to a tree declaring it private, as if trees read. You watch a surveyor measure the land with a rope, careful, precise, apologetic. He knows this is wrong in the way weather knows it will rain. He does his job anyway. Jobs are convincing like that. Over time, the village thins. Some leave, some stay and adapt. The land changes hands again and again, each time further from the people who knew it best. The paperwork thickens. The story simplifies. Progress is declared a success. You realize enclosure frauds do not need lies that are elaborate. They need lies that are quiet. A date altered, a signature assumed, a right omitted. The rest happens on its own. As evening falls, you stand at a fence that did not exist yesterday. The fields beyond it look no different. The difference lives in who is allowed to touch them. You put your hand on the wood and feel the vibration of a new rule settling into place. The peasants drift home, smaller somehow, as if the land took a piece of them when it was renamed. Children ask where they can play. The answer is complicated, and you understand that the most effective theft does not take land. It takes permission to exist upon it. You step into a guild hall that smells like polished wood, ambition, and the faint anxiety of men pretending they understand ledgers. Banners hang proudly, embroidered with symbols meant to suggest tradition, stability, and the comforting idea that someone else has already figured this out. The room hums with opportunity, or at least with people who want opportunity to be contagious. A senior member welcomes you warmly, too warmly. He speaks of brotherhood, shared prosperity, and the ancient wisdom of investing together. He gestures to a chart scratched into wax tablets, lines climbing upward in a way that feels reassuring without being specific. This is not a gamble, he assures you. This is a system. You learn quickly that joining requires a contribution, not a fee that would sound transactional, a stake, an investment. Your money will be put to work recruiting others who will also invest, creating growth that benefits everyone involved, especially those who arrived earlier. This part is not emphasized. It is implied politely. The guild frames itself as exclusive. Membership is limited. Opportunities rare. This creates urgency without appearing desperate. If you hesitate, someone else will take your place, and that someone else will enjoy the rewards meant for you. The logic is flawless if you do not examine it too closely. You watch new members arrive, eyes bright, pockets lighter. They are congratulated publicly. Applause reinforces the feeling that something important has just happened. No one mentions what the guild actually produces. Goods are discussed vaguely, trades referenced abstractly. The real product, you begin to suspect, is participation itself. There is humor in how earnestly everyone repeats the same phrases: passive income, shared risk, mutual benefit. These words bounce around the hall like well-trained pigeons. They sound meaningful because they are familiar, not because they are explained. You notice that payouts flow upward. Senior members receive regular returns, funded by the contributions of those below them. This is described as success, proof the system works. When asked where the money originates, the answer is always expansion. Growth is the solution to every question. The guild encourages you to recruit friends, family, anyone you trust. Trust accelerates the process. If you believe in it, others will too. If they hesitate, Remind them that doubt is how people miss out. The pressure is gentle but persistent. You are not forcing anyone. You are helping them. Meetings become more frequent. Charts grow more complex. The upward lines continue, even as the pool of potential members shrinks. No one points this out. Instead, the guild introduces new tiers, new roles, new incentives. Complexity creates the illusion of sustainability. You watch as early members grow confident. They dress better, speak louder, offer advice. Their success stories are paraded as motivation. They are living proof, even though their wealth depends entirely on the arrival of fresh believers. Eventually, recruitment slows. It always does. There are only so many people willing to buy into the same promise. The atmosphere shifts subtly. Payments arrive late. Explanations lengthen. External factors are blamed. Markets, politics, weather, anything but the structure itself. The humor fades when members begin to ask questions. The answers are defensive now. Faith is encouraged. Doubt framed as sabotage. Those who leave are labeled uncommitted, ungrateful. They simply did not understand the system, which is convenient because understanding it fully would end it. You watch the collapse happen quietly. No dramatic announcement, just fewer meetings, less enthusiasm, a notice about restructuring. Senior members disappear one by one, citing personal reasons. The hall empties. The guild dissolves, but the idea survives. It reappears elsewhere, under a new name, with the same promises and slightly different symbols. The lessons are not learned because the language keeps changing. As you leave the abandoned hall, you see flyers for a new opportunity posted nearby. Different guild, same pitch. The cycle resets. You realize then that these schemes do not rely on greed alone. They rely on the hope that someone else has found a way to make money effortless and is generous enough to share it for a price. You step into a counting room where the air feels sharper, as if numbers themselves have edges now. The walls are lined with ledgers thick enough to stop a blade, each one filled with columns marching confidently across the page. This is not medieval coin counting anymore. This is Renaissance banking, where arithmetic has learned how to smile politely while doing questionable things behind closed doors. The banker greets you with ink-stained fingers and a gaze that suggests he knows exactly how much you are worth, even if you do not. He speaks of ratios, balances, futures, words that sound clean and intelligent, words that imply precision. What he does not mention is that precision is optional when everyone agrees not to look too closely. Money here no longer sleeps in chests. It travels. It multiplies. It exists simultaneously in several places, depending on who is asking and why. You watch as sums are added, subtracted, and then gently rearranged to say something more convenient. The math is correct in the way a portrait is correct. Flattering angles, strategic lighting. Interest appears wearing a respectable coat. Lending money for profit used to be suspicious, bordering on sinful. Now it is framed as service, growth, progress. The banker explains that money wants to move, and preventing it would be unnatural. He does not say that money moving like this mostly benefits him. You see loans stacked atop loans, each one justified by projections scribbled confidently in the margins. Expected profits, anticipated returns, faith translated into fractions. If something goes wrong, adjustments will be made. Adjustments are easier than apologies. The humor reveals itself in how moral flexibility is discussed as innovation. Charging interest is not greed. It is compensation for risk. Risk, conveniently, is calculated in ways that always favor the house. When numbers misbehave, they are encouraged to behave differently next time. You watch a merchant borrow heavily to fund a venture that has not yet happened. The banker nods approvingly. Optimism is collateral now. If the venture succeeds, everyone celebrates. If it fails, the debt remains impressively intact. Failure is surprisingly durable. Double entry bookkeeping is introduced with reverence. Every transaction recorded twice. once to say it happened, once to say it made sense. The system feels elegant, almost holy. Balance is achieved even when reality feels lopsided. The books always agree with themselves, which is the most important agreement of all. You notice how morality is discussed in the same breath as math. A loss can be deferred, a gain anticipated. Ethics are flexible when stretched across time. The future absorbs discomfort neatly. If someone suffers now, it is unfortunate. If someone profits later, it is visionary. The banker shows you how debts can be sold. Obligations traded like spices. Risk redistributed until no one remembers who owes whom, only that someone does. Responsibility becomes abstract. Pain becomes distant. There is laughter at the table when someone mentions usury laws. Those are medieval concerns, you are told. This is a new age, an age of reason. Reason, it turns out, is excellent at justifying profit. You see how cities rise on this math. Palaces funded by loans. Art commissioned with borrowed money. Beauty financed by future repayment. The numbers make it possible. The consequences are scheduled for later. When things collapse, as they sometimes do, the explanation is complex. Markets shift. Wars intervene. Plagues interrupt projections. The math did not fail. Circumstances did. The banker survives. He always does. You realize that Renaissance banking does not abandon morality. It redefines it. Good becomes profitable. Bad becomes inefficient. Neutral becomes negotiable. Numbers provide cover. They look objective. They feel inevitable. As you leave the counting room, you hear the scratch of quills continuing behind you. Ledgers fill. Columns align. Somewhere, a decision is being made that will affect lives far beyond this room, justified by calculations no one else will ever see. You step back into the street where people trade goods, labor, time. They do not speak in ratios. They feel the outcomes. And you understand that when math learns how to bend without breaking, it becomes the most convincing excuse anyone has ever invented. You step into a studio that smells of oil, dust, and quiet confidence. The light is carefully managed, angled just enough to flatter everything it touches. Canvases lean against walls, some finished, some pretending to be unfinished in a way that suggests intention. This is not a place where art is discovered. It is a place where art is decided. The forger greets you like a colleague, not a criminal. He talks about composition, pigment, brush pressure. He speaks with affection about artists who have not yet been born. That is not a mistake. He explains that style always arrives before the story. Someone will paint like this eventually. He is simply early. You watch him work. He does not copy an existing masterpiece. That would be lazy. Instead, he creates what feels like a missing piece, a work that should exist, a painting that completes a pattern historians have not noticed yet. When the original eventually appears decades later, it will look suspiciously derivative. The humor sits in the confidence. He knows museums crave narrative as much as beauty. They want discovery. They want context. A painting without history is decoration. A painting with a convincing backstory is priceless. The forger provides both. He shows you how age is manufactured. Layers applied and gently stressed. Pigments mixed according to formulas that match the period exactly because science is very cooperative when asked politely. Cracks encouraged to appear in ways that feel natural. Time is simulated carefully, respectfully. The signature is added last. Not boldly, not proudly, as if the artist assumed no one would ever look too closely. Humility is convincing. You realize that arrogance is a modern affectation, the past preferred understatement. You learn that forgers study collectors more than artists. They know what is missing from private collections, what would complete a room, what a patron wants to own before anyone else realizes it should exist. Desire leads, art follows. When the painting is unveiled later, experts gather. They tilt their heads. They murmur approval. Someone mentions brushwork. Someone else references a letter that almost mentions something like this. Doubt flickers briefly, then settles. The piece feels right. Feeling right matters more than being right. You notice how quickly certainty forms once money enters the conversation. The higher the price, the less likely anyone is to question it. Doubt is expensive. Acceptance is profitable. The painting is declared authentic by consensus, which is how most truth survives. There is a quiet satisfaction in how the forger anticipates future scholarship. He plants hints, a vague reference here, a suggestive note there. Years later, an academic will discover these crumbs and feel brilliant. The painting will be cited. Legitimacy will solidify. Sometimes, the originals never appear. That does not matter. The forgery becomes the reference point. Books are written, exhibitions planned. The invented masterpiece shapes understanding retroactively. History adjusts itself politely around it. You see how institutions participate without admitting it. Museums want prestige. Collectors want validation. Critics want relevance. Everyone wants to believe they were present at discovery, not deception. The forger provides the opportunity. The rest is collaboration. Occasionally, something goes wrong. A pigment analysis reveals an ingredient that arrived too late. A document contradicts itself. An expert grows suspicious. The scandal unfolds. Heads shake. Committees convene. The painting is removed quietly, then reclassified, then forgotten. But even then, the damage is limited. The forger moves on. New works, new periods, new styles. Art history is vast and porous. There is always room for another missing piece. As you leave the studio, you realize that these forgeries succeed because they do not lie about beauty. They lie about timing. They offer the world something it wants slightly ahead of schedule, wrapped in credibility. You glance back at the canvas, still drying on the easel. It looks inevitable. Someday, someone will study it earnestly, tracing influence backward, constructing a lineage that never existed. And you understand then that the most convincing art does not imitate the past. It invents a memory the future is eager to adopt. You unfold a map that smells faintly of seawater and fresh ink, a dangerous combination. The land it promises lies far away, beyond oceans you have never crossed, in places described with confidence by men who have never been there either. The paper is generous. Rivers are wide. Forests are orderly. Borders are clean. Nothing bites, floods, or resists. A representative speaks to you in a room filled with similar maps and louder dreams. He tells you this land is abundant, fertile, waiting. He uses the word empty, which is convenient because it erases complications without sounding cruel. The territory is described as opportunity rather than place, a blank surface ready for improvement. You are not buying soil. You are buying a story, one where distance works in your favor. The farther away the land is, the less it can contradict the brochure. You nod as the man traces borders with his finger, confident that geometry is destiny. He assures you that others have already invested. This comforts you. It should not. Colonial land bubbles thrive on imagination. The land is sold sight unseen, but never undescribed. Descriptions pile up enthusiastically. Mild climate, rich resources, cooperative locals, if any. The language smooths everything sharp. Difficulty is postponed. Profit is immediate, at least on paper. You watch contracts signed with enthusiasm that feels rehearsed. Shares are divided, estates named. People refer to holdings thousands of miles away with proprietary affection. My land, my valley, my future port city. Ownership settles comfortably into conversation long before it has any relationship with reality. There is humor in how quickly wealth is assumed. Men who have never planted a seed discuss harvests. Those who cannot navigate their own streets speak confidently of trade routes. The bubble inflates, not because of ignorance alone, but because everyone is rewarded for optimism. You learn that land can be sold many times before anyone ever arrives. Speculators flip parcels based on rumor and revised maps. Prices rise. Excitement builds. The land itself remains unmoved, indifferent to its popularity. Promoters circulate letters describing progress. Settlements founded, crops planted, infrastructure planned. These letters are vague enough to be unchallenged and specific enough to feel credible. Delays are explained by weather, natives, or the ocean, which is always an acceptable excuse. When someone finally travels there, reality intervenes rudely. The land is swamp, or rock, or already inhabited by people deeply uninterested in contracts written elsewhere. The climate is hostile. The rivers flood. The promised port is impossible. News travels slowly. Denial travels faster. Back home, the bubble continues. Doubters are dismissed as pessimists. Early reports are reframed as temporary setbacks. The land needs investment, not scrutiny. More money will solve the problems created by selling imaginary solutions. You see how governments participate. Charters granted. Claims recognized. Maps updated to reflect ownership rather than geography. Authority lends weight to fantasy, and fantasy rewards authority with taxes and influence. Eventually, the bubble thins. Ships return with stories that cannot be softened. Crops fail. Settlements vanish. Conflicts escalate. The land refuses to behave like the map. Prices falter. Conversations quiet. When collapse comes, it is uneven. Some lose everything. Others exit early, enriched by the optimism of those behind them. Responsibility disperses conveniently. Promoters blame circumstances. Investors blame promoters. The land, once again, is silent. You realize that colonial land bubbles are not about exploration. They are about distance, weaponized into profit. The farther away reality is, the more flexible it becomes. As you fold the map and set it aside, you notice how appealing it still looks. Even now, knowing what you know, the clean lines and confident labels tug at something hopeful. The idea of untouched land remains powerful, especially to those who never plan to touch it. You step back from the table where deals are still being made, voices still bright. Somewhere across the sea, the land exists exactly as it always has, indifferent to ownership, unimpressed by ink, and you understand that the bubble was never inflated by land at all. It was inflated by the belief that distance makes promises safer to believe. You board a ship that smells of pitch, wet rope, and national ambition. Flags snap overhead, bright with symbols meant to inspire confidence and discourage questions. This voyage is not private. It is official, sanctioned, blessed by signatures that carry weight far beyond the dock. Exploration, they call it, as if naming something makes it honest. You listen as officers explain the mission. New lands, new routes, new wealth for everyone back home. The language is generous and deliberately vague. Details are unnecessary when destiny is involved. The ship is funded by the state, which means the risk belongs to someone else, and the rewards, should they appear, will be credited carefully to the right people. Maps are unrolled below deck. They are speculative works of art. Coastlines imagined confidently. Resources sketched optimistically. Empty spaces labeled with potential rather than fact. You notice how often the word claimed appears, even when nothing has been seen. Ink arrives before boots. State-sponsored scams work best when wrapped in patriotism. Questioning the mission feels like questioning the future. Doubt is reframed as disloyalty. If the voyage fails, it will still be heroic. If it succeeds, it will be inevitable. Either way, the sponsors are insulated. You observe how funding is raised, taxes adjusted, bonds sold, promises made about returns that sound reassuring and distant. Citizens contribute because the state assures them this is an investment in greatness. Greatness, conveniently, does not come with receipts. As the ship leaves port, crowds cheer. They are not cheering accuracy, they are cheering movement. Motion suggests progress even when direction is unclear. The scam begins not with deception, but with momentum. At sea, the reality sets in. Supplies are thin. Charts contradict each other. Storms rearrange plans casually. The crew adapts, because adaptation is cheaper than admitting the plan was flawed. Reports are drafted carefully. Success is emphasized. Difficulties are framed as temporary. Communication travels one way more efficiently than the other. You notice how discoveries are announced. A stretch of coast is declared rich before anyone steps inland. A harbor is described as strategic without testing its depth. Names are assigned quickly. Naming creates ownership. Ownership invites funding. Funding demands optimism. The state back home receives glowing letters. Progress is steady. Challenges are manageable. Indigenous populations are mentioned briefly, usually as obstacles or footnotes. The narrative is controlled tightly because exploration is expensive and belief must be maintained. There is humor in how loss is accounted for. Ships vanish. Crews disappear. Expeditions return empty-handed. These are recorded as sacrifices for knowledge. Knowledge is a flexible outcome. It cannot be weighed, which makes it useful when nothing else can be shown. You see how officials distance themselves from failure. The explorers mismanaged resources. Weather intervened. Circumstances changed. The original decision remains sound. It always does. Accountability dissolves across committees and time. Meanwhile, new expeditions are planned, using the same maps, the same language, the same promises. The scam refreshes itself. Each failure justifies another attempt. The state insists that perseverance is virtue, not evidence of a flawed premise. Those who profit are rarely those who sail. Contractors, suppliers, administrators. Titles are granted. Pensions secured. The explorers themselves are remembered selectively, as heroes if convenient, as cautionary tales if not. You begin to understand that state-sponsored exploration scams are not about discovering the unknown. They are about managing perception. They convert public funds into private certainty while maintaining the appearance of ambition. As the ship limps into a foreign harbor, thinner than planned and richer only in stories, you help unload crates filled with specimens no one asked for. Someone will assign them meaning later. Someone will write a report that sounds like success. Back home, monuments will be proposed, names carved. The voyage will be remembered as necessary. The cost will be abstracted into history. You stand on the deck and watch officials argue about what to report. The truth is too complex. The myth is ready. Exploration ends where honesty would have to begin. You stand in a square dressed like a celebration, where banners flap cheerfully and hope is sold in small, affordable portions. A table sits at the center with a locked box, a priest nearby, and a crowd arranged carefully so everyone can see everyone else believing. This is not gambling, you are told. This is providence with rules. The lottery has divine approval, which is the most important feature. The priest explains that the outcome will be guided by higher wisdom, not controlled exactly, but gently influenced in the direction of justice. Justice, in this case, looks suspiciously like revenue for a church project that has been underfunded for years. You watch people buy tickets with the seriousness usually reserved for prayer. Coins drop into the box. Names are written carefully. Some add small notes, asking for guidance, mercy, or a sign that things might finally turn. The priest blesses the box repeatedly, as if holiness needs reinforcement. The humor hides in the structure. The lottery is presented as fair because chance is involved. What is not emphasized is who prepares the lots, who guards them, and who interprets the outcome. Divine will, it turns out, prefers trusted hands. A man explains that winning is a sign of favor. Losing is a test. This logic is wonderfully resilient. No outcome disproves it. Those who lose are encouraged to reflect. Those who win are celebrated loudly, ensuring everyone sees that the system works. You notice how often the winners are connected. A cousin of a clerk, a patron of the church, A man who donated generously last year and could really use a reminder that generosity is noticed. No one calls this corruption. They call it mystery. The drawing begins. The priest reaches into the box, slowly, dramatically. Silence stretches. Anticipation thickens. A name is read. Applause erupts. The winner looks stunned, which is appropriate, because gratitude photographs better than suspicion. You learn later that the name was always going to be drawn. The lots were arranged. The box was never fully mixed. The divine approval was more of a branding decision than an operational one. But standing there, watching faces light up, it feels convincing. Lotteries like this thrive because they turn inequality into entertainment. Everyone has a chance, technically. The poor contribute eagerly because a small coin buys a large dream. The wealthy contribute strategically because they can afford to hedge favor. The prize is often modest, enough to change a life briefly, not enough to threaten anyone important. The real profit is in the steady flow of contributions, justified by spectacle and sanctity. People will give more willingly when they believe heaven is watching. You notice how sermons adjust around lottery days. Prosperity is emphasized, patience praised. The idea that fortune is moralized settles comfortably into the crowd. If you win, you deserve it. If you lose, you need improvement. The system is absolved either way. There are moments of quiet discomfort. A woman wins who is clearly desperate, and people whisper that the miracle is real. A man loses repeatedly and stops coming, which is interpreted as a failure of faith rather than a sensible conclusion. Absence is easier to explain than doubt. Occasionally, someone questions the fairness. The response is swift and polite. Do you doubt divine judgment? Do you question the priest? Do you lack faith? The questions stack until the original concern disappears under social pressure. The lottery funds a new roof, a new bell, a new statue. Tangible results help. You can see where the money went. This quiets suspicion. The rigging is forgiven because something nice exists now. You begin to understand that the lottery is not about winning money. It is about converting hope into predictable income while preserving the illusion of randomness. Divine approval is simply the most efficient marketing tool available. As the crowd disperses, people clutch their tickets a little longer than necessary. Some will keep them as proof they tried. Others will buy again next week. The box will be blessed again. The outcome will be explained again. You step away from the square knowing that chance was never the point. Belief was. You enter a meeting room, arranged to feel important. Long tables, serious faces, papers stacked with deliberate disorder. Someone has placed a globe in the corner even though no one will touch it. This is a scientific society, you are told. And science, apparently, prefers dim lighting and confident voices. The men here wear modest coats and immodest certainty. They greet each other with nods that suggest shared understanding, even when they disagree completely. A chair scrapes, a gavel taps, the session begins, and with it, the quiet sale of answers. They promise certainty, not inquiry, not doubt. Certainty is the product, neatly packaged and ready for export. In a world that feels unpredictable and occasionally hostile, certainty is valuable. It saves time. It ends arguments. It allows decisions to be made without the discomfort of admitting ignorance. You listen as a speaker presents a theory with impressive clarity. Charts are unfurled, measurements cited, conclusions delivered confidently. Questions are permitted, but only the polite kind, the kind that clarify rather than challenge. Real skepticism is discouraged with smiles and sighs. Membership in this society is not free. Knowledge may want to be universal, but certainty prefers a gate. Fees are justified as necessary for progress. Research costs money. Printing costs money. Authority, as it turns out, is surprisingly expensive to maintain. You notice how often consensus is emphasized. The society agrees. The society has concluded. The society has determined. Individual voices dissolve into collective authority, which is much harder to argue with. If everyone here believes it, who are you to object? There is humor in how quickly conclusions solidify. A hypothesis becomes a principle becomes doctrine. A doctrine becomes something you are expected to accept quietly if you wish to remain welcome. Doubt is framed as unproductive. Curiosity is fine, but only when it stays in its lane. You see how certificates are issued, endorsements granted, seals pressed. A member leaves with papers declaring them informed, enlightened, aligned with the latest understanding. These documents travel far. They settle debates in places the society has never visited. The society sells certainty because uncertainty does not scale well. Questions slow things down. Ambiguity invites chaos. Certainty, even if premature, creates momentum. Funding arrives more easily when answers are clear. Patrons prefer confidence to honesty. You watch as inconvenient data is discussed briefly, then set aside for future consideration. Future consideration is a comfortable shelf where troublesome facts can rest indefinitely. The official conclusions remain untouched. There is an unspoken agreement here. Members do not undermine the society publicly. Disputes are handled internally, quietly, or not at all. Unity matters more than accuracy. A fractured authority is less profitable than a wrong one. You hear how the society's findings are marketed, pamphlets printed, lectures delivered, simplified explanations offered to the public. Nuance is removed carefully, like bones from fish. What remains is easy to swallow and difficult to question. Some members believe deeply in what they present. Others believe in the structure itself. Both types contribute equally. The system rewards alignment. Those who challenge too loudly find themselves excluded, their work labeled controversial or unfinished. You notice how the language shifts when money enters the conversation. Research priorities adjust. Questions that attract funding are pursued. Others are postponed. Science follows curiosity until curiosity becomes inconvenient. The humor sharpens when rival societies emerge. Each sells its own certainty. Each claims legitimacy. Each dismisses the other as misguided. The public, watching from a distance, chooses whichever certainty fits their needs best. Truth becomes a matter of branding. Occasionally, a discovery shatters the agreed-upon understanding. Panic flickers. Meetings are called. Statements drafted. The society adapts, reframing the old certainty as a stepping stone rather than a mistake. History is revised politely. You realize that fake scientific societies do not reject science. They imitate its appearance while skipping its discomfort. They offer answers without questions, conclusions without doubt. They sell the feeling of understanding rather than the work of it. As the meeting ends, applause fills the room. Papers are gathered. Confidence remains intact. Outside, the world continues behaving unpredictably, stubbornly indifferent to declarations made indoors. You step away with the unsettling clarity that certainty, when sold, rarely includes a refund policy, and that the most convincing answers are often the ones that ask you to stop looking. You arrive just after the panic has been announced. Bells ring too loudly. Messengers run with unnecessary urgency. Someone is always shouting about borders, shortages, enemies just beyond the horizon. You notice how carefully the fear is paced. Never so much that people stop thinking entirely, but enough that they stop asking questions. This is where war begins, not on battlefields, but in rooms where men with clean hands explain why violence is suddenly unavoidable. They do not invent armies, they invent emergencies. The weapons come later. You stand near a table stacked with maps, all of them freshly updated. Lines have shifted. Threats have moved closer. Towns that were peaceful last season are now described as vulnerable. The ink is still drying, which is impressive considering how urgent everything is supposed to be. A man with a practiced voice explains the situation to anyone willing to listen. Supplies are dangerously low. Armor is outdated. Horses are insufficiently fed. The enemy, conveniently unnamed, is very well equipped. He pauses at the right moments, letting the implications settle. If nothing is done, something terrible will happen. Soon, you watch merchants lean in. This is not fear to them. This is opportunity wearing a helmet. They nod gravely while calculating how many shields can be produced before the next announcement of doom. Emergency shortens negotiations. Prices rise naturally when time is scarce. Contracts appear with impressive speed. Wax seals are pressed while the crowd is still anxious. Agreements are made in the language of necessity. No one wants to be remembered as the person who hesitated while danger approached. The profiteers move smoothly between groups, never lingering too long. They are sympathetic but firm. Yes, the cost is high. Yes, the timeline is tight. Yes, corners may need to be cut. Survival, after all, is not a luxury process. You notice how often the emergency shifts. When one fear loses momentum, another is introduced. A rumor of invasion becomes a rumor of betrayal. A border dispute becomes a supply crisis. Each problem requires a slightly different solution, conveniently sold by someone already in the room. There is humor here, dark and uninvited. The same men who warned of famine last month now warn of excess. Too many mouths to feed, too many soldiers to arm, too much peace-breeding complacency. The emergency adapts to inventory. You see warehouses open that were mysteriously sealed before the crisis. Weapons that were unavailable suddenly exist in abundance, though at a premium. Armor that was considered obsolete is rebranded as urgently sufficient. Even fear has marketing language. The rulers listen carefully. War is expensive, but appearing unprepared is more costly. Advisors whisper about public morale, about appearing decisive, about the dangers of delay. It is remarkable how quickly caution is framed as weakness when someone else stands to profit from haste. You observe how dissent is handled, not crushed, just labeled. Those who question the emergency are described as naive. Those who demand proof are accused of undermining unity. In uncertain times, certainty is demanded, even if it is borrowed. The crowd begins to repeat the language they have been given. People speak of threats they have not seen, enemies they have not met. The emergency spreads socially, faster than any army could march. Fear is contagious when it offers purpose. Behind the scenes, ledgers fill with numbers that never reach the battlefield. Profits accumulate quietly, while soldiers are promised honor instead of pay. The war machine hums long before it fires a shot. You notice how the profiteers never call it war. They say preparedness, defense, stabilization, words that sound responsible, words that can be extended indefinitely. Emergencies, once invented, rarely resolve cleanly. When the first skirmish finally occurs, it almost feels anticlimactic. The emergency had already done its work. Money moved, power shifted, contracts were fulfilled. The battlefield is just the receipt. You stand back as the noise grows. Drums beat. Banners rise. People cheer with the relief of having direction. Fear has been transformed into action, which feels like progress even when it is not. The profiteers watch from a distance, already preparing the next explanation, because when peace threatens to return, it too can be described as dangerous, and there is always another emergency waiting to be announced. You arrive at an office that smells new in a way nothing else in this city does. Fresh wood, fresh ink, fresh promises. The door plaque gleams, the name etched with confidence. Something solid sounding, something that implies longevity. You are assured this enterprise will be here for generations, which is an impressive claim for a building whose mortar is still drying. Inside, everything looks legitimate. Desks are aligned. Ledgers sit open, as if mid-calculation. A clerk nods at you with the practiced calm of someone who has memorized trust. There are stamps, seals, ribbons, all the accessories of permanence. It feels official because it has learned how to look official. This is how ghost companies are born. Not in shadows, but in daylight. With paperwork, you watch investors arrive carrying coin, goods, sometimes entire hopes. They are greeted warmly and thanked sincerely. Receipts are issued with flourishes. Shares are described in careful language that sounds technical enough to discourage further questions. Ownership becomes a word that floats comfortably without attaching to anything solid. The founders speak of expansion, always expansion, new routes, new markets, new partnerships just over the horizon. Horizons are very useful things. You never have to reach them. You only have to point. You notice how often tomorrow is mentioned. Profits tomorrow, deliveries tomorrow, returns tomorrow. Tomorrow is doing a lot of work here. The staff is efficient, but curiously uninvested. No one personalizes their space. No mugs, no family crests, no signs of expectation. They are actors in a play with a very short run. When asked about longevity, they smile in a way that suggests the question is charming but unnecessary. The company has assets, technically. Warehouses that exist on maps, ships that are currently delayed, contracts with partners who are temporarily unreachable. Everything has an explanation, and the explanations fit together just well enough to feel reassuring if you do not press too hard. You see how money moves through the books quickly. In, then out, then somewhere else. Layers of transactions pile up like cushions, softening any fall, but also absorbing accountability. By the time someone asks where the funds went, they have passed through so many hands they feel abstract, almost imaginary. The founders host a dinner. Wine flows, toasts are made. Success is spoken of in the past tense, as if it has already happened. People laugh louder than necessary. Confidence is contagious in enclosed spaces, and then, quietly, the exits are planned. It starts with small absences. A clerk does not show up. A partner is traveling. A signature is delayed. Nothing alarming, just friction. The doors still open. The plaque still shines. The illusion holds. Then one morning, you return, and the door is locked. The plaque is gone. The office is empty. Desks stripped. Ledgers vanished. Even the smell has changed, as if legitimacy itself evaporated overnight. Neighbors shrug. They were always quiet tenants. Seemed respectable, paid in advance. Investors gather, confused, holding papers that suddenly feel thin, receipts that no longer point anywhere, shares in a company that no longer occupies space, ownership without an object. Authorities are notified, but the trail dissolves immediately. Names were borrowed, addresses were temporary, seals were real, but applied by hands that have moved on. The founders have stepped sideways into new identities, new offices, new promises, already rehearsing sincerity. You learn that disappearance is the product. The company was never meant to operate. It was meant to exist just long enough to collect belief, then convert it into mobility. Ghost companies are not failures. They are successes measured differently. There is a strange efficiency to it. No violence, no overt theft, just a gentle removal of certainty. People are left staring at empty rooms, wondering how something that felt so real could leave no residue. You notice how quickly the city adjusts. Another plaque appears down the street. A different name, similar lettering. Fresh wood, fresh ink, fresh promises. Someone says this one is backed by serious interests. And you realize the scam does not rely on greed alone. It relies on rhythm, on the human preference for momentum over scrutiny, on the comfort of familiar forms, on the belief that if something looks established, it must be. Ghost companies do not haunt because they scare you. They haunt because they remind you how easily trust can be rented, furnished, and abandoned, all without ever breaking character. You step forward in time and expect the tricks to change. New buildings, cleaner suits, softer chairs, lighting that flatters everyone equally. The language has improved. The confidence has not. Medieval scams did not die. They learned how to use glass and electricity. You sit in a room that smells like polished wood and optimism. Screens glow with graphs that move constantly, which is comforting because motion feels like progress. No one mentions grain shortages or invading armies anymore. Now the threats are abstract: volatility, uncertainty, market sentiment. The words float politely, like monks who learned accounting. You notice the same rhythm from centuries ago. Urgency without clarity. complexity presented as sophistication. If you do not understand something, that is positioned as your failure, not a warning. In the Middle Ages, ignorance was spiritual. Now it is financial. A man explains leverage to you with a smile that suggests this is very simple. He uses metaphors involving ladders and doors and upside without dwelling on gravity. Someone else mentions instruments, derivatives, positions. It all sounds musical until you realize no one is listening to the tune, only the promise of applause. You think of indulgences, how salvation once came with a receipt. This feels similar, except now the paper is digital and heaven is retirement. Pay now, worry later. Faith, but with interest. Money moves faster than metal ever could. Coins once clinked, now value flickers. Entire fortunes change hands without anyone touching anything. The abstraction is elegant. When loss occurs, it feels unreal until it is not. You watch institutions explain why risk is necessary for growth, necessary for innovation, necessary for everyone except the people who designed it. When things go wrong, responsibility disperses beautifully. No single villain, just systems behaving unexpectedly. Medieval scammers would have wept with admiration. The contracts are thicker now, longer, written in a dialect designed to exhaust curiosity. No one expects you to read them. Reading implies hesitation. Hesitation implies weakness. Confidence is rewarded even when misplaced. You see echoes everywhere. Banking families of the Renaissance smiling from portraits as their modern counterparts smile from magazine covers. Same posture, same reassurance, different tailoring. There is humor in the repetition. The idea that complexity equals legitimacy. That if enough layers exist, truth will give up trying to reach the surface. Medieval forgers used wax and seals. Modern ones use algorithms and disclaimers. You attend a presentation. Slides appear with upward arrows. Projections extend comfortably into the future. Someone jokes about castles and dragons, distancing themselves from history, unaware they are reenacting it. The crowd laughs. Laughter is a form of consent. When losses happen, they are framed as lessons. Tuition for the market. Necessary pain. Pain that seems to prefer visiting the same people repeatedly. Those at the top apologize with impressive sincerity and remain exactly where they are. You notice how blame is narrated. External forces. Unforeseen conditions. No one admits to inventing the emergency, only responding to it. War profiteers would recognize this language instantly. There is always a new product, a solution to the last solution. Innovation, stacked atop innovation, until no one remembers what problem started the process. The pitch is never about need. It is about opportunity. Opportunity does not require proof. It only requires timing. You remember counterfeit coins destabilizing regions. Today, the metal is replaced by confidence itself. When trust falters, markets shake. When belief wavers, value evaporates. It is the same fragility, scaled up and electrified. People still want certainty. Medieval pilgrims bought relics. Modern investors buy assurances. Both are sold by someone standing slightly closer to authority than you are. The lighting helps. Clean lines, neutral colors, everything designed to feel controlled. The setting whispers stability even when the content screams improvisation. And when the collapse comes, because sometimes it does, the story resets. Investigations, reforms, new rules, fresh names, fresh plaques. You realize the greatest trick was never the scam itself. It was convincing each generation they invented something new. The castles are gone. The ledgers are digital. The belief, however, remains beautifully medieval. You sit surrounded by devices that hum softly, screens glowing like obedient candles. Everything feels advanced here. Smooth surfaces, intuitive gestures, promises delivered in fonts designed to feel trustworthy. You are told this era is different, smarter, faster, less naive. The past, you're assured, was clumsy. This is precision, and yet the pitch sounds familiar. Someone leans forward and lowers their voice, not because it's a secret, but because intimacy sells confidence. They tell you this technology changes everything, that old rules no longer apply, that distance, effort, and risk have been removed by innovation. You hear echoes of alchemists promising gold without mining, bankers moving money without metal, prophets offering certainty for a contribution. Only the nouns have been upgraded. You notice how often the future is invoked. Not tomorrow exactly, but soon. Just enough time to invest, to subscribe, to commit before everyone else understands. Being early is framed as intelligence. Being cautious is framed as fear. The words have changed, but the emotional choreography is medieval. A demonstration begins. Data flows beautifully. Graphs climb at polite angles. Problems dissolve under sleek animations. You are shown how easy it is, how frictionless, how inevitable. Complexity has been hidden behind buttons labeled with confidence. You don't need to know how it works. That would only slow you down. This is where the pitch never evolves. Understanding is optional. Participation is urgent. You think of fake relics passed through markets. How belief did most of the labor. This feels similar, except now belief is quantified. Likes, shares, metrics, engagement, numbers that suggest truth through repetition. If enough people nod, it must be real. The salesperson smiles and mentions disruption, a favorite word. It sounds rebellious, even noble. But disruption has always been part of the scammer's vocabulary. It excuses damage. It reframes fallout as progress. Medieval land frauds displaced peasants. Modern ones displace responsibility. You are offered access, early access, exclusive access. The oldest trick, dressed in new code. Belonging is the product. Technology simply automates the invitation. You watch skeptics ask questions and receive gentle reassurances. The system is too complex to explain fully. Trust the experts. Trust the process. Trust the math. Math has replaced scripture, but it serves the same function here. An authority most people won't challenge publicly. The pitch accelerates. Time is limited. Spots are filling. Windows are closing. Urgency always arrives right on schedule. It has perfect timing because it is built in. You realize how carefully language is chosen. No one promises certainty outright. They imply it. They gesture toward it. They surround it with testimonials and case studies and carefully selected success stories. Failures exist, theoretically, but never nearby. This is not deception through lies. It is deception through framing. Technology makes everything scalable, including trust. One voice can reach millions. One claim can replicate endlessly. Medieval scams required travel. Today, belief arrives instantly, prepackaged and optimized. You think of ghost companies disappearing overnight. Now they don't even need to vanish physically. They rebrand, pivot, update. The same structure persists under a new interface. Accountability lags behind innovation by design. There is humor in how proudly this era declares itself immune to history, as if repetition stopped being repetition once it gained bandwidth, as if better lighting erased old habits. You notice how often responsibility is deferred. It's the algorithm, the market, the users, the unforeseen edge case. No single hand pushes the lever, so no single hand can be blamed when it breaks. The pitch concludes with a vision. A world transformed, barriers gone, opportunity democratized, everyone included, eventually, after the early adopters, after the founders, after the people who believed first. You applaud lightly, because everyone else is. Applause is contagious. Silence feels awkward. Doubt feels antisocial. And in that moment, you understand something simple and uncomfortable. The tools have evolved. The speed has increased. The polish is immaculate, but the pitch is identical. It always has been. Trust me. Move quickly. Don't ask too much. And imagine how disappointed you'll be if you miss this. You stand where the noise has faded. The banners are gone. The office is emptied. The platform's quiet in that particular way that follows enthusiasm. What remains is paperwork, screenshots, receipts, emails that now read like artifacts from a vanished civilization. This is the part no one advertised. People gather in small groups, not to protest, but to compare notes. They speak softly, as if volume might attract judgment. Each person explains how they should have known, how there were signs, how they missed them. The language is apologetic, even when no apology is owed. You notice how quickly blame turns inward, not because the system demands it, but because it feels safer. It is easier to say, "I was foolish," than to say the structure was designed this way. Personal failure feels manageable. Systemic deception feels endless. Someone laughs awkwardly and calls it a learning experience. Another shrugs and says everyone loses sometimes. These phrases circulate like comfort objects, passed hand to hand. They soften the impact. They also redirect attention. You see the same pattern repeated across centuries. Medieval pilgrims blamed their own lack of faith when relics failed to heal. Investors blamed impatience when returns vanished. Belief, once broken, rarely turns outward first. It folds in on itself. There is a strange politeness to the aftermath. No torches, no mobs, just silence and spreadsheets. People quietly updating their understanding of the world, lowering expectations, recalibrating trust. The scammers counted on this. Noise attracts consequences. Shame produces compliance. You listen as someone explains how the pitch made sense at the time. The numbers were convincing, the endorsements credible. Everyone else was doing it. The explanation sounds reasonable because it is. These systems do not prey on ignorance alone. They prey on participation. The institutions issue statements, carefully worded, sympathetic but distant. They promise reviews, audits, improvements. The language is soothing, like a balm applied to a bruise that will never fully fade. Accountability is mentioned abstractly, never personally. You notice how rarely the word scam is used. It is replaced with failure, collapse, miscalculation, events without agents. Grammar does a lot of work here. Victims are interviewed and asked what they would do differently. Not what should change, not who benefited. The question frames the story neatly. Responsibility stays local. The system remains intact. You think of counterfeit coins, destabilizing regions, of ghost companies dissolving overnight, of war emergencies invented for profit. The pattern is consistent. When it ends, the crowd disperses quietly, each person carrying a private lesson that does not threaten the architecture. There is humor here, but it is brittle. Jokes about trusting too easily, about being naive. Humor becomes armor, a way to keep dignity while absorbing loss. It works well enough to prevent outrage. You stand among them and feel the weight of it. Not just money lost, but certainty. The subtle shift that happens when people decide the world is a little more hostile than they thought. That trust should be rationed. That hope needs disclaimers. What you do not hear is collective anger. Not yet. Anger requires clarity. Clarity requires naming the structure. That takes energy, and most people are tired. The designers of the scheme have already moved on. New names, new pitches, new audiences. They rely on this moment, the quiet one, when consequences feel personal rather than political. When victims self-edit their own stories. You see how history repeats not because people forget, but because they internalize. Each generation thinks it failed uniquely, rather than being targeted predictably. Shame resets the board. Someone asks you if you think they were foolish. The question is sincere. They want absolution, not analysis. You realize how powerful that impulse is, to turn exploitation into a character flaw, to make suffering feel deserved. But standing here, surrounded by the debris of belief, you see it clearly. This was not a lapse in intelligence. It was a system functioning as intended. And until that truth is easier to say than "I should have known better," the cycle remains elegantly intact. You step away from the wreckage carrying something quieter than anger and heavier than facts. Understanding does not arrive with applause. It settles in slowly, like dust after a procession has passed. You have seen the tricks, traced the patterns, followed the money as it slipped through centuries with different accents. And now you notice what never changed: hope. It is easy to call people foolish from a distance. History does it constantly. Pamphlets, textbooks, commentaries all love to shake their heads at those who believed. But standing here, with the echoes of pitches still humming in your ears, you understand how insulting that is. No one wakes up excited to be deceived. They wake up wanting things to be better. You think of the medieval pilgrim pressing a relic to their chest, not because they misunderstood wood and bone, but because they were sick and desperate and tired of watching loved ones fade. You think of the merchant signing a contract with shaking hands, imagining stability instead of hunger. You think of the investor staring at a glowing screen, hoping this time the math aligns with the dream. Hope is not stupidity. It is exposure. You see now how every scam begins by identifying a shared ache: fear of poverty, fear of meaninglessness, fear of being left behind while everyone else moves forward. The pitch never starts with lies. It starts with recognition. I see you. I understand what you want. I can help. That is the hook. Everything else is scaffolding. You remember how often urgency was used, how speed was framed as wisdom. Hope hates waiting. Waiting feels like decay. Action feels like life. Scammers know this instinctively. They rush, not because time matters, but because reflection is dangerous. There is a strange kindness in the lie, not because it is moral, but because it speaks the language of desire fluently. It tells people the world is fixable, that salvation is reachable, that fairness is just one transaction away. Even when false, the message resonates because it aligns with a deep wish that things should make sense. You notice how rarely victims talk about hope afterward. They talk about mistakes, about missing signs, about trusting too much. Hope is rewritten as error. But that rewrite protects the system. It implies the next version will work if people are simply smarter. You know better now. You have watched intelligent, cautious, experienced people fall into the same traps across eras, not because they lacked knowledge, but because knowledge does not cancel longing. You can understand risk perfectly and still want relief. You can recognize patterns and still hope this time is different. Scams succeed because they do not fight human nature. They cooperate with it. You think of how belief operates socially, how reassurance multiplies when shared, how seeing others commit reduces the perceived danger. Hope becomes communal, and once communal, it feels almost rude to doubt. Doubt threatens belonging. There is humor in how universal this is. From medieval marketplaces to modern conference halls, the setting changes, but the posture remains. People leaning forward, listening closely, imagining outcomes just beyond reach. The pitch adapts to technology, but it never abandons emotion. You realize that awareness alone is not immunity. Knowing this does not make you untouchable. It makes you more honest. It allows you to recognize when your own hope is being leveraged, polished, packaged. This understanding is uncomfortable because it removes the easy villain. There are scammers, yes, but there is also the structure that rewards them, the systems that normalize speed, celebrate disruption, and quietly punish caution. Blame floats conveniently downward, while profit rises. You stand with this clarity and feel something steadier replace cynicism. Not distrust of people, but respect for vulnerability. If hope is the entry point, then the answer is not mockery or shame. It is patience, transparency, slowness, systems that do not demand belief before proof. You leave knowing something important. People are not gullible because they are ignorant. They are vulnerable because they are human. And as long as hope exists, someone will try to sell it. The task is not to kill hope, but to stop building worlds where it can be harvested so easily.